Hi, and welcome everybody to the Western Energy Markets Regional Issues Forum. I am Lindsay Schlettboy. For those who don't know me, I am the EIM Entity Sector Liaison and the Chair of the RIF. I'm just going to go ahead and go through the agenda real quick, and then we'll turn it over for opening remarks. So for today, we have our first panel, which will be the day-ahead market enhancements and EDAM implementation and go live panel. And this is really just a discussion about lessons learned and challenges with implementation and just what other lessons we have learned and potential changes that we would need to make along the way. And then from there, we have a brief break, about a 10-minute break that we'll be taking. And then we're going to move into the intertie bidding panel, which is an educational session about the possibility of opening up intertie bidding. But I just want to reiterate or state for this panel that this is really intended to be an educational session. For those that don't know, the Kaizen tariff already effectuates intertie bidding, so this is not something we're trying to get a tariff change, but an educational panel to really have the discussion. And then we're going to move into
she's on that
updates. This is just a brief update for stakeholders.
These are the slides. From here.
This is where it is.
This is what we're saying now.
Nowhere to participate or to follow along. So this is just going to be.
Yeah, sure.
So that way, since she's been in the slides as they do next.
About the resource status program, so.
I feel
And then from there, we'll just have some quick closing remarks and a quick wrap up. And then we will move on.
Really?
Who will join us. So,
the thing is that if we go to this in my
Markets Governing Body Chair, to what?
Okay.
This is, oh, it is fun. Okay. I am inartfully talking into the microphone. Good afternoon, welcome to New Mexico. Thank you all for being here, and thank you for RIF leadership for adding on to our meeting. The governing body meets tomorrow. It really helps us because we can stay joined together, but it also puts us into a part of our EDAM world that we're not visiting a lot. And to be in New Mexico, get to see the folks from PNM and from the PRC, Chair Aguilera. It's why we do this, so that we are out getting to see people we normally don't get to see. Sometimes we get kind of over fulsome and over zoomed. So thank you all for coming, and I encourage you all to stick around tomorrow. Just wanted to just set the table a little bit. Take you back. It's been 6 weeks since EM go live. Paulette is still standing. Still standing. And what a remarkable experience I got to have that week in Folsom. We had meetings, and I got to stick around for an employee appreciation. And I forgot how many people actually work at the ISO, because it's normally kind of a ghost town because everybody's actually working. But it was amazing to see everybody who's been working so hard to make this happen from the ISO's perspective. But I also know that goes to the Pacific Core team, all the vendors, everybody who's been doing support for this. And it kind of reminded me that, we get so bogged down in the weeds of our initiatives, and I'm always obsessing about the calendar. When are we going to vote on initiatives? And then digging into, okay, who's saying what's coming in. But I kind of forget about the big picture that we've achieved both with EIM and now with EDAM. We've come a long way. This is unique. Nobody else does this kind of wacky approach, but we're doing it. And now we're turning the page, and we know with EDAM going live, that we're going to have a whole host of new issues that are coming up that we're gonna have to sort out the new stakeholder initiatives. And I know that that's a lot on top of what everybody else is doing their day jobs, participating in the RIF, doing whatever, like, they're actually supposed to be getting paid for. And so I'm super appreciative to everyone who's taking the time to engage. And then finally, with the RIF, so appreciative of you all who are engaging on that. I really feel like we're going to be part of this glue that's going to hold things together for stakeholders as we transition into another brave new world, later this year and beginning next year and beyond. So thank you, RIF. Thank you, stakeholders. Appreciate it. Can't wait for this panel. Like I have said to her, I'm really excited about this, and hope you can join us for the reception tonight and then hang out for the governing body meeting. You know, we really hooked up on great time. Thank you. Okay. So, and then Mr. I think Casey, could you please go over the requirements for anybody if they would like to raise hands or ask questions during the meeting, and then this would be the function that you utilize if you would like to ask a question.
I'm sorry, can you please repeat that for me?
Yes, could you go over the instructions for those on the phone of how they should raise hands to ask questions? We'll do that at the end of the panel, but I just so people are informed of how to do that feature.
Absolutely. As a reminder, to indicate you want to ask a question verbally on WebEx, click the raised hand icon at the bottom of center of your screen. You will hear a beep when you are unmuted. At that time, please state your name and question.
Thank you very much. All right, so moving on, we're going to start with our first panel. I'll turn it over to Kalia Savage, who is the other Dr. Lead.
Thank you, Lindsay. Well, scared of this mic, don't know how it is. Good afternoon, everyone. Excited to kick off today's meeting with a really exciting topic on WEM. My name is Kalia Savage, as Lindsay noted. I am the Western Energy Imbalance Market Entities Liaison with Portland General Electric. I also have been in my day job, EDM implementation for Portland General as well. And throughout that process, I was the one who revised our vote. I also worked with ISO to execute all of the mini agreements that PGE needed in order to participate in EDM. And now currently am onboarding all of our transmission customers into EDM. So, and we just went to parallel operations about 2 weeks ago. So all of the topics that we are about to cover are very near and real for Portland General. So I'm very excited to open this up for everyone to talk about. So 6 weeks ago, EM went live. And after years of stakeholder meetings, verifyings, market simulations, and implementation efforts, we are finally at the point where we can stop asking, how should this work? And start asking, what are we learning as the operation, which is a really exciting part of moving from policy into actual operations and implementation. So that is really the premise for today's discussion. This panel is not intended to be a formal lessons learned exercise, nor is it intended to be a policy debate. We are still very early, and no one is expected to provide definitive conclusions. Instead, the goal is to have a factual and constructive discussion around what participants are experiencing as they operationalize DAME and EDM. So we hope to provide stakeholders today practical observations and examples, perhaps even some early data that can help inform others preparing to join a data market. And we have an outstanding group of panelists today with different perspectives across the market. So immediately to my right here is Dr. Khaled Al-Tulwani from TISA. I hope I said her last name correctly. Sorry, I should have practiced that next time. Bringing the market operator perspective and helping guide DAME and EDM from implementation into live operations. Next is Jonathan Rummel from Southern California Edison. He's providing the perspective of a large California load serving entity and transmission owner under DAME. Next is Catherine Fulbert from Vistra. She's bringing the generator and market participant perspective and the practical realities of operationalizing policies in bidding, dispatch, settlements, and commercial decision making. And last but certainly not least is Christine Rock from Pacific Corp, representing the first EVM entity and bringing the unique perspective of an organization that operates as a balancing authority, transmission provider, generator, and then certain entity outside the price and balancing area. So with that, let's get started. But before we talk about early operations, I think it's helpful to understand the different perspectives represented on the stage and what each organization had to do to prepare for dating and participation. So if you could just briefly introduce yourself and describe what organizational, operational, or business practice changes are most significant in preparing for dating and or even participation, and what areas reach more complex or impactful than initially expected. We'll start with you, Helen.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for inviting me to this. Hopefully we have to eat. Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. First, from the California ISO point of view, this was a new undertaking. And like you said, the effort was over so many years, and the market design and the changes that happened. For California, so the expanded day-ahead market was one, but the day-ahead market enhancements were also a major lot of features and market design changes that impacted our business processes in terms of the California ISO, as well as our market participants. The biggest change that we have is the number of processes that we have to run for the day ahead to complete from the time we close the market till the time we publish the results. We used to have three models: market power mitigation, forward markets, and then the availability. Those three now become six possibly, which includes the resource efficiency evaluation tests, which is an optimization one, and then the greenhouse gas reference calculation reference point, which is another optimization one. And then you have the market power mitigation, the forward market, and then you have the reliability market power mitigation, and then you have the reliability. So from a process point of view, this was like a huge they had operators, and of course with all of the requirements and the features and the new products that came along with the enhancement, like the imbalance reserve and the availability capacity. So it was needed that we had to reevaluate all of our systems to ensure that we can exclude everything from findings.
Hi, I'm Jonathan Norman, Southern California, and SCE is obviously touching I guess implementation, and we are still coordinating the other assets in the transmission. We participate heavily in the market design aspect of this, and necessary scrutinize both in Southern California. So they were the baby and position really impact our organization a number of different things. I would say that what we had to do most is first remember how to do a number of different things. We're making changes, and we have to get the data that we think we need to monitor to see how the market goes in operations and within the industrial environment. And that was a pretty big undertaking. We get data already from ISO, but having to incorporate new products and anticipate how the EDM work of the transition was going to sort of impact it took us some time. So now we want to be monitoring things just outside of, SBA stuff. So that took a lot. I think one big challenge that we had was working on one of the big challenges. One was working with sort of the settlement side, making sure that those third-party vendors were aware and keyed in on the changes that were being made on the FISO side, so that our software, but we saw other aspects of the transition, we're actually able to see. There's a line, right? So it's probably faster makes change, it gets to the vendor, incorporates the software, eventually we're downstream of that. Lesson learned might be we want to have a cutoff date on when changes, get made prior to the implementation of the transition. Because if you're making changes up in the last week, the vendors aren't getting that into the software. You're, I don't want to say flying blind, but maybe operating with double fingers tied behind. In addition, one of the things that we really were curious about is, well, how are these products going to work? Are these products that we have ideas on how we want them to work? And then on top of that, in California, investment utility, there's a question of how other regulators in the state of California are going to review these products and what their reactions will be, and how we
Turn down slightly. California guys using the cloud and a little high right now.
a very tight rope between two regulators trying to support what we think is a very, very important second transition. We want the West. We want to support the West. We want them to support us. This is the willing. But it can be hard sometimes. We got multiple regulators with different views on how things get in. And hope everybody works better and better together so that makes our jobs.
Okay, great. Technology learning group. First, I want to say thank you to the Thursdays, not to me, for inviting me. And I want to say thank you. Thank you, Helen, and your team for all of the work. And I think your team, I mean everyone, not just the technology group, although they really excelled. For all the work they did, and coordinated, and really trying to help with this process. I'm looking forward to answering hopefully when I talk a little bit more about some of the things I've heard about, challenges of lessons learned, but trying to be very responsive. Talia, I like the way she framed the questions, like what were the big rocks that we had to struggle with as a market participant? For us, we're a system coordinator, generator, owner, operator, and honestly, some of the biggest impacts of this implementation, hear people talk about.
They say it's coming through garble.
Transformation.
Garbled. So
Through this deployment, KISO fundamentally changed the way that they price energy, changing the LNP design. They also fundamentally changed the way that they produce their greenhouse gas pricing. Those were some of the biggest changes. The GHG pricing, as well as going from system marginal energy cost, which is how all energy markets function, to a PAA marginal energy cost. And it's not a policy question, it's a very practical question for a trade floor. Because especially trade floors that have a national, right, we're a national company.
We have desks across the entire country in all but one of the organized markets. And if you think about it from an organizational perspective, like this is a core foundation to how energy markets function. And when you start pulling the thread on that and changing how prices are formed, it has an existential impact on the way a desk will have to operate. They have to relearn what an energy market is. So someone who maybe has 20 years of experience trading energy, this is a whole new ballgame because it's a market design with a pricing that doesn't exist anywhere in the world. And I want to emphasize that. So that's a tremendous learning curve for the entire team, from policy all the way to the technical SMEs to work together to figure that out. That was probably the biggest lift, because pricing and how you reflect your risks within your bids is like the core function of the scheduling coordinator, right? We're trying to efficiently and effectively manage our assets to provide a service, and managing risk is really important. With new products, you don't know what those risks are. So I'd say that's the second biggest rock, is you're participating in testing and you're trying to figure out, can we size what the risks of receiving this award, what settlement risks are there, what's the lift, and in the testing process, parallel ops, that's not a production environment. So it's directional, it's indicative, it's very helpful. But especially in our process, it was changing until I'd say day one, give or take. And that cutoff, I smiled, it's really important. Makes it really hard to start to size your risk. So we weren't really able, I kind of joke around, like we're sort of testing in production right now. But it's true. We're seeing what those prices are from a production quality. We're seeing our awards. We're starting to get some transparency into settlements, which I'll talk about more later, which we really didn't have until go live. All of that means that it's going to be much more difficult for a team to kind of figure out how do they change the way that they would manage that asset on day one. So that was our biggest, I'd say the second biggest rock. The third one I would add is, we sell RA to California. And so we had a very difficult time getting clarity on what our must offer obligations were for these products. I think we're still trying to make sure we understand, just to be super transparent. And we still have questions out there, and we're getting help, but that's a little discomforting to be in a production state and to still be a little confused about something as important as a MOO. The other thing that I agree with Jonathan is it's more than that. The rules around how we would participate in the market are like currently being litigated, and how someone selling that product would have to bid or not bid, kind of being informed by outside regulations. That introduces a ton of regulatory uncertainty and risk. And it's something that we're still struggling and kind of trying to contemplate what that means. And so I really think that there's a lot more time that we need to see how this implementation will bear out. But those are really, I think for us, it's been the price formation. How do we effectively what are the risks? How do we manage those risks? And what are our obligations? Do we understand them? And do we have to change how we bid consistent with that?
All right, so before we get going, I would be remiss, I appreciate the invitation to speak on behalf of PacifiCorp. I wouldn't be sitting here today if it wasn't for an incredibly hardworking staff at the CAISO, at PacifiCorp, at our technology vendors, of which we have many. Our customers who engaged and had to engage in a lot of different new things at a very rapid timeline, all the way down to our adjacent BAs, of which we have 14. They had to really support us, and they came through for us. And I will also say thank you to all the folks that disagreed with us and challenged us in our opinions. And I think ultimately we as an industry need to get better. And I think having healthy discourse and disagreement is healthy for a better outcome, as long as at some point we get to some doing. And so through that lens of the doer, I'll be speaking to you today. And for this first one, I'll be wearing a hat of the merchant. So PacifiCorp, we both are an entity and the merchant. So I'm going to wear different hats here today for you. But I would say the two biggest things that surprised us and were major things we had to adapt to is, first of all, the complex changes we had to make both on the IT side, on the process side. EDAM, I think in EIM, a lot of our departments and technology was able to kind of function. One department would do their thing, hand it over, and it worked just fine. EDAM, especially the RSE and some of the new products forced us to really work closer together. In fact, now we have departments that are using the same technology that they've never had to do. So there was just a huge organizational lift in thinking through this, and EDAM is, in order to be effective, forced us all to come much closer together. which I can't speak for other utilities, but let's just say we had some silos of excellence at PacifiCorp that needed to kind of step over that and come together. So that was, a big lift for a large organization to come together around this. The other thing I would say and highlight is going from 5 days to 7 days. Now, Danley Copus over here, of course, in grid ops and gen ops, they always have people that operate. But historically, gas traders, they're on call over the weekend, but they're not working. And so we onboarded new EDAM traders that are now supporting the ongoing work on the weekends. Some of the other things that was new for us, we had to figure out who to trade with. If we needed more energy over the weekend, we had to go around and found ourselves some counterparties that we could actually trade with, and how would we reach out to them and make these deals happen, because none of that really is a common way of dealing with these issues. The gas traders, they're very used to making, and there were lots of stakeholder conversations prior to go live around the timing of the gas market and how that doesn't neatly work up and some of the challenges. And, it's very, very busy at 1 o'clock to 3 o'clock for our gas traders now who have to figure this out. PacifiCorp does not have the benefit of a lot of storage. So we are using the pipes, and that is a lot of coordination that we're getting better at, but that took, that's a major change. And I would say, it's a hectic kind of time on our, and in addition to all the other things that Kathleen mentioned, which is that a lot of our traders have done this work for a long time, and EDAM is just challenging a lot of the fundamental ways of doing business and looking at that, and needs better data and feedback. We stood up a data science team to support that front office function to just get better at this work because it's so important. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And maybe I'll just add from an onboarding entity who's coming in like right on the tails of PacifiCorp. I agree with everything that you just said. And I'll also add, I think that there is far more of a cross-functional implementation than I think that we had really realized as an organization. It'll touch departments that are not used to touching market design changes. And I think that's really important for organizations that are considering joining a day-ahead market, that there will be parts of your organization where you're having to educate them on what a market is and what is a day-ahead market, how do we do things now, how does that change in the future. That there's a big culture change there. So that was a really big lift, I think, for PGE, was really getting everyone on board and on the same page and moving in the same direction. And in general, I'll say that for those that have implemented EIM in a certain way, EDAM is a much different and bigger lift. I think for us, there's maybe a thought of, oh, we can just leverage a lot of the same things, and that's not necessarily true. And so there is a lot that goes into this implementation that took a lot of preparation and thought, and it really that all has to do with, I think, the CAISO team, who has been incredibly supportive throughout our implementation, but also, again, we get the benefit of coming in after PacifiCorp, who worked out a lot of the kinks for us too. But to your point, Christine, you were talking about transmission, kind of like the coordination. Like there's a lot of external coordination that has to come on. And especially from my work in onboarding transmission customers, there's a lot more that you have to do in EDAM than we ever really had to do in EIM. And that's a huge change. So from a transmission provider's perspective, preparing to participate in EDAM, that customer coordination is so key. So can you, staying with you, Christine, how did you coordinate with transmission customers ahead of EDAM go live? And what questions or concerns came up most often? And especially looking back, what would you recommend other transmission providers prioritize when preparing their customers for EDAM?
So I will just flat out admit that, so PacifiCorp has over 100 transmission customers. And as part of EDAM, initially we, I think, had not anticipated how many of our customers would want to become scheduling coordinators under the CAISO. So we went live with around 20 scheduling coordinators. Of course, some of them have load only, some of them have gen, some of them have both. And there's this whole process with the CAISO to register. And so just for framing, so much more complex stakeholder environment, if you will, a lot of moving pieces. There was, of course, a lot of ongoing workshops, meetings. The CAISO stood up at track 7, which was incredibly helpful to support our customers. But then there's, I would say, market fluency. So everybody, there's plenty of stakeholder calls. All of us were part of this, and not always everybody participates at the same level. And I think one of the things we discovered is we had initially said, well, we can cover X topic in this workshop and Y topic in this. And, you know, as we got closer and through this process, more and more new people would onboard to these workshops, and the same questions would need to be answered again, which of course is important because people need to understand these pieces. You know, we had explained tagging and all of these various things, you know, in very detailed multiple times, and we still 2 weeks before go live, we're on the phone with people explaining it again, showing examples. And so I think the complexity, depending on how many transmission customers you have going into EDAM, I think starting earlier and just reapplying more liberally than I think we had initially anticipated is useful or something to consider. The other thing is new tools, and I think considering the perspective of others to use them, we decided to kind of tip our toes into getting stakeholder and user input on some of the tools we were developing. You know, I recognize that from some folks' perspective, maybe, you know, still not enough opportunity to weigh in on some of the, you know, just how everything is laid out and how it's functioning. But that if you're developing new tools to support your customers, you know, anticipate testing, anticipate getting input on the design specs and some of these things to bring people along, with the caveat, of course, that towards the end, there's going to be some people that may not have paid attention and or for whatever reason, right, that you're going to have to just be prepared to bring them in the loop. The other thing is we experienced, you know, a lot of we tried different ways of engaging customers, and we ended up on kind of a centralized function. So we actually had an inbox, and we had people actually whose job it is to monitor these inboxes and get back and kind of triage the answers and keep a catalog. We created a spreadsheet where all the questions and all the answers would be posted, so people would have access to that. So for us, centralizing and being much more thoughtful around organizing staff to support and become more of a, you know, almost like a product launch support organization is arguably not something that we started out being aware of. Now, that may or may not need to be done for anybody after us, because now the vendors have their tools done. All of this was an issue because, you know, most of our vendors had the tools were being built while we were trying to onboard things that weren't built yet necessarily. So don't mean to scare anybody, but just from our perspective. And then the number one thing is, you know, from a transmission perspective, communication, start earlier than you think, and more applications, and or figure out how to save things. We attempted to put recordings on Oasis. It's just complicated with technology sometimes, how to have these that just kind of bring people along and inventory the information and kind of provide that feedback. So I would say, you know, the tagging was one thing that we're still dealing with now, where we're supporting people on the phone, kind of one-on-one. That's not a one and done, and that's okay, but just to be aware. Okay.
Yeah, I think that's my biggest nightmare is the customer that shows up like on, I don't know, September 29th and is like, hey, what do I need to know? Obviously not within my control, but definitely agree. There's it's a different relationship in EDAM that the transmission provider has with their transmission customers. Normally we can just post anything on Oasis and it's up to the transmission customer. It's their responsibility to watch, but this actually has consequences. And so, yeah, trying to find ways and starting early, I agree with transmission customers for those that are potential EDAM entities is so critical, early and often.
Can I add a couple?
Absolutely, yeah.
Also, I think one of the biggest advantages of the EDAM market design that it brought this concept of transmission capacity, economic transmission capacity participation. So for those transmission customers and transmission owners, they now have a new way of how do you participate in a market by having this the market will try to utilize any unused capacity to allow transfer. And the transfer is not only for the energy, like regular transfer that we used to in the WEM market, but now in the EDAM, you can transfer also capacity, like whether it is imbalance reserve, whether it is reliability capacity. So that capacity that used to be generation capacity that used to be expensive, now you can transfer it using those available transmission capacity in an economic fashion from one area to the other. So that introduced a lot of learning curve, I guess, on top of the registering as a scheduling coordinator and all that, but also how do you determine the quantity that you want to participate in?
Yeah, big plug for the EDAM FAQ. That is really helpful with a lot of really good information because there is a lot of new things that are introduced in EDAM, to your point. Okay, so shifting, we kind of talked about preparation. Let's get into operations. So the day-to-day operations and how organizations have translated policies into business processes. This is not about drawing conclusions on market performance, but it's really understanding operationalizing things changes looks like. And so how have your organization's day-to-day market activities changed as DAME and EDAM policies have moved into operations? What has been most important to operationalize around bidding, awards, dispatch, residual unit commitment, or imbalance reserves, self-scheduling, et cetera, et cetera? There's a lot in EDAM. So if we can start with Kathleen first to get the generator and market participant perspective, and then we'll go down the panel.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Kalia. It's a really good question. I'm torn between answering settlements first versus talking about more of the bidding.
That's bold, Kathleen.
I know. I'm like, which do I go with? I would flip this B to B and go the opposite way. So I would say bid to bill kind of as a concept has been probably one of the most challenging aspects of the entire implementation is understanding going from your bid to your bill. I mentioned some of our challenges, and John, thanks for kind of raising, and this is very much so, it's like a community of, we also had challenges with vendors. I wonder if there are some kind of improvements maybe for future deployments that we could think about how to better understand the hurdles that vendors are having, because that was something that really shined out for us, is that there was a lot of challenges with getting our systems internally to be updated so that, we were able to look at all of the KISO applications, right? We were able to manually test and kind of make some manual changes. We were able to kind of go into their applications, but we didn't have our own systems, which is how we trade, right? So operationally in a production environment, we have our own systems. We have that then transfer information to the KISO systems. Settlements are received by those systems. That's a part of our whole process from the floor to the back office, right? So by not having those systems ready, we were not actually able to test those until really go live, to be honest. And that was around the time that we were able to have our own systems be able to accommodate. That's how long it took for our vendor to be able to integrate us with those systems. And so we've really been testing that as we're going. So we are still in our learning curve because we only just got our own systems integrated fairly recently. Settlements is, I would say, the other piece of this puzzle is, again, we didn't have transparency into the settlements to be able to kind of look at it through our normal course of business. We did try through the testing process to kind of follow and anticipate. But now that we do have that, we are looking at the settlement statements. So I would say that is very recent, the ability to look at the settlements and try to connect what we see in settlements to what our market awards were, but also to then refer back to whether it's a configuration guide or a pre-calculation if we have questions, to see if we can figure out the answer ourselves, you know? And that has been enlightening, that has been very difficult. We have a lot of questions about those settlements that I can't find clear answers to in, like, let's say, just an example, in a configuration guide, it may have a new phrase, and just an example is imbalance reserves, it's precision quantity. There's actually several different terms of phrases that are being used throughout the documents and throughout the settlement documents, not even BPMs to settlements. And they're not defined and there's not a formula. And when I try to backtrack it to the business requirements, there's also not a formula in the business requirements. And it's more just trying to understand, right? So if we can't backtrack to how are these things calculated, then we can't shadow settle. We can't really make sense of our results, which puts us in a rough position where we're still trying to figure out how do we actually validate that the results are kind of consistent. How do we fully test, right, from our side, that the results that we're seeing from a bid to bill are what we would expect to see. We like to say functioning as designed. Not quite at a place where I can confidently say, at least on our side, that is being validated. And so I think in an operational window, one thing I'd like to see if I can make a plug is we have very firm settlement timelines for when we can dispute a settlement. And that is something that's come up in some of the implementation meetings. I'll give a shout out to a stakeholder who raised it last week, and I believe is going to submit a city ticket on behalf of all market participants, asking the CAISO leadership team to think of a solution for us in recognition that we're all just getting our settlements really set up. Some of us, even if you think about it from those third-party SCs, may not even really fully see their picture yet at all. And I didn't mean to speak for Kirsten, I don't have transparency into that, but I would imagine if we're still lagged and we get direct settlements, that there's some friction there. And I would like to see the CAISO acknowledge that challenge and try to see if there's a way that we could have a little more flexibility around disputes if certain issues are identified. So that's one thing that I know would be really helpful operationally.
Yeah. So Kathleen, we agree on the disputes issue, and I believe also put in a ticket for that. And I think the CAISO is looking into that. I also, the way all the issues with the kind of the delayed software from Pacific Core, my initial project plan had code complete for all my software in November. Okay, so let's just say that didn't happen. And, I recognize we took the CAISO's existing day ahead market and extended it. And sometimes I wish we would have chosen a different word for the extended day ahead market, because it's really its own thing, right? We adapted heavily the CAISO's engine and then integrated, made so many changes. And part of that, I come from product development. So from my world, this is like what a really big, new, complex product kind of looks like. And yes, you will be late. And yes, these things won't be all documented. The question is, how do we respond, and how does the CAISO respond quickly to doing that? They've certainly worked really hard with us, but I hear you, our settlements vendor is still not quite done doing all the changes. And, my expectation is that will get better. So want to validate what you're saying. The other three things I wanted to just maybe highlight that's perhaps different from some of the other panelists is, the master plan, the master plan. The importance is in the name, right? And in WEIM, we all use the master plan. And I think in EDAM, takes on a completely different importance when the market can take your resources, in the day ahead. And we have, and maybe different folks have different processes, but at Pacific Core, we have, our plants provide input and they give regular updates on what these capabilities are, PMIN and PMAX and ramp rates and all these things. And then we have plant engineering, and then we have our agendas operator. And sometimes they don't agree on what a particular plant can do. And this question around how do these plants, what information goes in the master plan, and then seeing in both parallel ops as well as now,
kind of what are the inputs? And I will say that we use the market quality information we got from the CAISO, both in parallel ops as well as still now, for diagnostic tools to see, we're like, what's wrong with this particular plant, right? And it turns out maybe on the merchant side, they didn't bid it correctly, or maybe there's a wrong, something is wrong. So again, ironing this out, and I can only recommend to have a really, really thoughtful process on the master file for anybody that's, spend your time getting all this dialed in. The second thing is, for instance, we would see as we're in parallel ops, the RSC, we would be fine, we start with the advisory runs and we'd be fine at about at 8:30. All of a sudden the RSE requirement would go up, not by a little bit, but meaningfully. And we could not figure out. So we got on the phone with Aled that afternoon. And as it turns out is that the CAISO does one of the elements goes in the RSE is load forecasting. And in the CAISO's case, they use all their vendors to come up with the load forecast. But in the morning, there's kind of a manual review process where they sometimes make adjustments. And that happened to be, around that time when they pushed it. So that then left us with, and all the other customers with, between 8:30 and 9, we now had that one more run to make changes. And so we worked with the CAISO, and very quickly they figured out what needed to happen, which really means their team, I don't know if they ended up having to come in earlier or not, but the adjustment was getting done earlier. So we had multiple ways to do that. So this would be kind of a, we will find other things like that perhaps in the next couple of months to kind of fix. And then the last thing I would say, in our organization, key decision documents typically just kind of happen for major big things. They get written, people sign off on it, and they get put away for governance. We ended up using KDRs or key decision documents on core technical issues because we had so many different departments and so many different stakeholder views that needed to come together and needed to be wrestled to the ground, documented so we could move forward. Sometimes we would have meetings every week or every 2 weeks, and we'd have, 5 to 10 different KDRs, technical documents on the docket just to get through because we had to move forward on implementing and providing guidance. So, again, only caveat is PAC's experience. Many of you may have a very different experience, but master plan, if you do one thing, do the master plan really well.
Let's go to John first and then we'll do Colette.
As an organization that already participates in the day ahead market, the challenges we faced probably were any fewer. However, the Dane products are new, and so we definitely had to broaden the work that we do, incorporate these new products into forecasts, incorporate these new products into sort of our after the fact analyses. Why are these awards occurring? Why are these awards not occurring? And additionally, it's been a lot of work on the settlements with trying to understand clawbacks and the such. But I would say that our operations have not been as severely impacted as organizations that are new to the day ahead market. So I'll end there so you don't have to listen to.
Yeah, from California ISO, I think from the day-to-day operation, the introduction of the EDAM introduced a process which is what Christine was talking about, the resource sufficiency evaluation. This is a new process that needs to start from 6 o'clock in the morning. Every half an hour you run it. We didn't have that process going on in our, people used to start like 9 o'clock. You start your day ahead preparation and all of that. Now we had to support all of these advisory runs. And also, we had the load forecasting and VR forecasting team. Usually they come in the morning and then they try to prepare for the 9 o'clock. But like Christine said, well, the advisory RSCs are running from 6 a.m. So we had to change our internal processes to be able to try to have a more accurate load forecast and more accurate renewable forecast as much as we can by the almost 7 o'clock in the morning to have that value, if not the night before. Of course, this comes, you know, if you wait longer, you get more information, you can get even more accurate. But this leads us to now we are considering, okay, how do I make it like fix the forecast for the sake of the EDAM entity and its third parties and customers be able to pass the resource sufficiency evaluation using like one variable, which is you give them what the requirements are, and then you give them the chance to be able to satisfy. So that was like a huge. The other big process change for us on a day-by-day basis is the establishment of a day-ahead reliability assessment. Instead of just looking at one day in the horizon, now we have processes that is looking from day 1 to day 4. And we wanted to give back that information to the EDAM entity in order for the EDAM entity to prepare their, you know, how they're gonna run their grid and operation for the day +1, the formal or the financially binding. So that was a new processes that we didn't have to externally expose before, but now we had to expose it. For the settlement, I don't know if you want me to talk about settlement now or maybe, but it is.
That could be a whole other panel.
Yeah, so I try to be like really very, I'm not the settlement expert, but at least I know that based on what we are discussing here, like when sometimes we get a question why this particular charge code is getting, let's say, bigger than what it used to be. Let's say for the particular one, I want to be specific, real-time imbalance energy, why it is growing or it seems to be growing. Well, for the first few days, yes, we did have some data issues, so I'm not gonna, you know, that's like wrong. That's because of the data issues. In the other days, we still have some things that we need to fix, but I encourage people not to look at one charge code because we changed the design. So you cannot compare it with pre-EDAM. Before EDAM, we used to have one system, I would say system energy, marginal energy cost. After EDAM, we split every balancing area has its own marginal energy cost. So that will introduce different calculation. So when you look at the charge code or the neutrality, for example, you need to look at the real-time imbalance plus the congestion neutrality plus, you know, even the GHG, because we changed the way that the GHG used to be part of the LMP of the WEM. Now it is actually in the GHG area. So that also changes. This is what Kathleen was talking about, the price formation. So you need actually to look at all of those together to be able to evaluate how things are going. So I just encourage people to take that into their consideration. However, I do admit that we did see issues after go live that we didn't, I mean, to the extent possible, we worked with our participants for the issues that were reported in the parallel operation. And we fixed those, but the new issues came up in the production scenarios, like some ITC binding constraints and the impact of that on different congestion or charge codes. Those things, we are working through them. We are hoping that we're going to get to a point where all of those issues are resolved in the initial statement, the T+9 business days. But we are working hard, all of the California ISO teams, from bid to bill, all the teams, they are actually reviewing all of this information and the data and the disputes and the amount, or even sometimes just a direct communication. We are reviewing all of that, and we're hoping that all of these issues will be adjusted in the T+70 businesses. Now, going back to the point where we recognize that probably this doesn't leave the participants enough time even if we get things T plus 70 correct, you didn't have time for your vendor even to evaluate the T plus 70, which means that we understand that we have to give you more time to be able to dispute any issue in the T plus 70, and we have to work on that dispute window. We have other even processes other than the dispute. Even if the dispute window is closed, we have the market issues where we could, somebody would report an issue to us and the internal team will look into it. And if it needs any adjustment, we will do the adjustments regardless of whether we have a dispute from that entity or not. We will, once we find an error, we will do the correction for everybody involved in that issue. So we are very, looking into that, and you will hear more from in the settlement user group on this issue.
So I'm glad you brought up kind of like how you've been addressing issues, because no implementation is perfect. And there's a lot of moving parts with this. And because there's such a diversity of market participants, everyone is impacted by an issue in a certain way. So I'm kind of curious, maybe from the other participants' perspectives, as issues were being, as your organizations were finding issues, how are you able to kind of escalate them and kind of work through? And we could talk about all of these topics all day. So we are running a little short on time. So if you could just try to keep your comments to a couple points, that would be great.
I'll go ahead and start. So from Edison's perspective, our sort of strategic plan, long-term strategic plan is all about clean energy and electrification and decarbonization of, frankly, California and maybe the West economy. So we see DAME as being instrumental in moving that effort forward. It is a single step, but it is an important step. And so one of the things that our senior management was very interested in is how successful DAME was going to be, because it really is a cornerstone, moving the markets to a place that are going to be able to support a cleaner economy and a cleaner utility system. So we have that aspect of internal escalation, and so folks were very interested. Well, how is parallel operations going? What are the issues you're seeing? What are the prices that are coming out? What are the implications around GHG? And so we spent a fair amount of time just on that sort of I would say from a strategic perspective, how is DAME going to be successful, along with, okay, just the sort of day-to-day operations, are settlements being processed correctly? Do we understand what the settlements are? During parallel operations, maybe we weren't quite as well-versed in what we were seeing as maybe we had hoped. But what we tried to do is, because it impacted many different parts of our organization, we definitely were constant communication with our senior leaders, trying to give them comfort that things were moving forward well, and B, that where there were issues, that we were on top of them. We were texting various people in the middle of the night. We were emailing people, and we were in touch with CAISO and pushing forward to the most successful DAME implementation. That was really where our management was focused. How do we make this as successful as possible? And I think it took some time, but I think we're in a really good place right now, and we're very excited for how it is going to evolve further. And I'm looking forward to number 5 as well, but our 5th question, because I think there's some interesting conversation we can have there.
Yeah, I'll be brief because I know we're short on time, and I'll just make a plug for, I'll be maybe super honest with Khaled, my friend. I'm still trying to figure this all out. And that's the most honest answer is my team with others are trying to log what we see. We are trying to understand what we're seeing. So like I mentioned, we're trying to map it to the documents. We're trying to understand. And so another pitch that I will make, and this is, for those in my background, I worked at FERC, I worked at the CAISO, so this may be coming more from that experience, but like, I really would encourage everyone that we don't have enough data to say with a lot of certainty that we have that something's an issue. There are some things that are easier for the technology team to say this is a variance or a defect, and it kind of pops out more quickly. And I think those are being addressed. There are other things that you have to look at trends. So you actually have to look at the market results over a long enough period of time to kind of identify whether it's sending the right kind of more persistent signals, or if there's something kind of anomalous that's popping up in that. And then those issues really impact markets, and can be can have a lot of exogenous impacts on the marketing outside of the CAISO, right? And so we want to continue to look at trends and then raise those issues with the CAISO over time. And I do encourage those, I really believe parallel ops is not good enough data quality to have strong opinions to say that something is to have a negative view on it. So that's my personal view, putting it out there on the table. I think production is, however, we're still really just trying to clean up any variances and getting to a stable, steady state where we can look at trends to identify issues that may need to be looked at again. So that's our view, and we're trying to approach it that way.
I mean, PAC didn't have one issue, so I don't know what to say. No, in all seriousness, you can catch me later about that, the how we dealt with all of this. I don't want to bore some of you who are not really into. So anyway, come find me if you want to talk about how to deal with some of that. But the two things I would like to say, similar to what my other panelists, as I mentioned earlier, I think getting better at turning data into insights. I frequently say utilities were data rich, insight poor, right? And we've attempted to take EDAM as kind of the forcing function to get better at that. And we have a ways to go, but we now, and VJ here and several on my team back home, they're looking daily, and we now have dashboards for our merchant functions and for our GHG, like all kinds of different folks to just visually get used to seeing the data. And it's amazing what can be spotted when people that know their job all of a sudden see it visualized versus in kind of a tabular format. And so I can just encourage, and the CAISO actually creates different dashboards and information that is up online. I would encourage you to look at that if you haven't. Incredibly important. And I think that's a big leap we have to make as an industry. We've chosen to invest in that and have seen good results. We have a long ways to go, but thanks God, AI is here to save us all. So it's good. And then the other thing I want to just point out for kind of the mixed crowd here, we need to mind the gap. The people that love to work on policy and tariffs and all this stuff, those are not the same humans, okay, by interest or experience as the implementers. And when I say implementers, we're not even just talking software, we're also talking, the grid ops professionals and all, like how does that stuff get operationalized? And I think there's a natural inclination when people in the policy world, of which I have one foot in that, we come up with things and there's very rarely this question about what does it take to implement? And in fact, on the congestion, and we'll talk about that tomorrow, it's now that we built this thing, we're much more mindful of like, well, what would this policy change? How would that impact with the CAISO system? And how would that impact all the downstream systems that will need to be built? Not that change is bad, but I do think we need to create some connective tissues between those different folks that typically don't speak the same language or have no reason to. So be mindful as you have your organizations, the policy people and the tariff people will throw something over the fence, and the people that have to make this happen, they will look at this and say, what were they thinking? Okay, so bring those together better, I think would be my recommendation. We had to learn this late.
I'll pretend I wasn't offended by that.
Yeah, I'll go quickly. Yes, we are. I mean, it's just about a month plus maybe a couple of weeks. What we are seeing from overall the trending on the market side, and we'll put the settlement we talked about, but from a market point of view, First of all, we are able to close the market, the bidding in the market 10 a.m. And on average, we are publishing also around the 1 p.m., which is really something was concerning for us, given that we multiplied the number of processes in the head, but we are still able to do that. In terms of the, we're seeing also a very high, impressive pass rate for all of the balancing area, California ISO, PAC East, and PAC West, very impressive. The market, the prices, what we are seeing in terms of the prices for the energy, for example, it seems to be following the expected trend and economic range based on the bids that are submitted in the market. And based on the season, we are in the spring season where the prices will be a little bit low within, in the middle of the day and high towards the evening and the early morning, which is expected at this time of the year. The imbalance reserve, the new products, the imbalance reserve, as well as the reliability capacity prices are also following similar trend like the energy, which is something really good because that's how we wanted it from a market design point of view to look like. So overall, just very high level, things seems to be from a market and running the market and the bidding and the prices and the economic. We see really a price separation between the different areas, which is expected, but that is also an indication of the economic opportunities that exist between the wider or a bigger footprint. We see transfers, between CAISO and PAC West and CAISO and PAC East. Plus minus, so that is also very good sign of indication that we are using to the maximum the capability or whatever is transmission capacity available for us. We see transfer of capacity between the areas that is even fantastic. I think tomorrow there is a more like in deep Guillermo and his team, Anna, and they're gonna prepare a presentation for the governing body. So they will show you more of those fancy charts and trends. Okay.
Okay, I would like to zoom out now and stay with you, Khaled, to help frame some of the early observations I think you started to get into appearing from the market operator perspective. So we are beginning to see some operational data. And like Kathleen noted, it's really early to be able to identify issues in the data, but stakeholders are naturally trying to understand what signals deserve attention and which observations should be viewed with caution. So from your perspective, what operational signals and metrics or trends are proving most useful, but also conversely, where should stakeholders exercise caution and avoid drawing broad conclusions from a relatively limited operational history?
Yeah, sure. As I said, from a market design and whether we can get some signs that our EDAM is actually working between the different areas. As I said, the fact that we have these transfers of not only energy but also capacity is really a big or a strong signal that the economics between the different areas is working. The fact that also all of these balancing areas is able to pass the RSC test, that gives a comfort, level of certainty that, yeah, we can get into the financial market in an equal footing for all of the balancing areas. The fact that the impact of the day-ahead schedules on the real-time operation is very smooth. I mean, barely people have seen any change in their operation. With the additional efficiencies in the transfer and the certainty of those EDAM or the day-ahead transfers into the real time, that's a very strong signal. Of course, what people, the other side of the question, which is the overreaction, which is the settlement. Of course, at the end of the day, what's my statements and my invoice? And I just don't want people to overreact at the settlements that we are issuing, the initial settlements. Some of that, we know that it's lacking some of the accurate data. Some of it is even lacking like meter data. Some of it is lacking, information that we have trying to be transparent in the settlement user group, but I think we are not doing enough or a good job in communicating it with overall market participants. So we need to do something better by listing those issues one by one, and maybe in a table saying what charge codes that are impacted by this issue. It's not enough to say, well, you know, the base schedules are, you didn't extract, for example, the day ahead schedules from the normal base schedule between the WEM and the EDA. Well, we need to translate that into, okay, well, if this is causing an issue in this charge code, and that's why you see this charge code is getting bigger or smaller or whatever. So we need to do a better job on that.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you.
Going from left to right, there are
Very briefly.
there
I know.
there are a number of things now. One of what I would say that it's still early, but we are very interested in the levels of IR and RC that are being procured, whether those are appropriate, whether those are translating into too much or too little supply in the real-time market. We're very intrigued by that, especially because there's been the convergence bidding has been a bit all over the place since May 1st. And so that has a substantial impact on the reliability capacity products. And so it would be interesting to see how it sort of settles. Secondly, how the power is moving, where the constraints are. There are, every once in a while, I am seeing constraints, binding constraints in $1,000, negative $1,000 prices. I think it's somewhere between Pack East and Pack West. I can't remember what the name of the sub is, the intertie is. And then lastly, I would say that we can't jump to any conclusions because we're expecting the EDAM to broaden. There's going to be a bunch more resources from other EDAM entities that are coming in, and power is going to flow differently. And so we shouldn't jump to any conclusions. And additionally, the existing entities are going to be bringing on tens of thousands of more megawatts of more resources in the next decade. And we have to be very mindful that the market is essentially causing the system to operate in the way that we are building the system. Because if the market design is wrong, we have all these storage and we have all this solar and we have all this whatever, but it's not acting as we want, there has to be a feedback loop that the CAISO takes into consideration. Are these resources being used in the way that they really should be? I don't know what that is, but that is something that we will encourage as time goes on.
Before we move on, will you also add in, with all of that said, what do you think would benefit from additional clarity based on this operational experience?
There's a lot of different things. Settlements.
Noted.
Sorry.
Kathleen?
It's the theme, I guess. Okay, so here's where I think people are underreacting. So my public service announcement, underreaction. First one would be, I've heard a lot of people talk about, this was a day ahead. You're new to day ahead. There is still a deep underreaction to the fact that this was a massive real-time enhancement and changes. Massive. The Western Energy Imbalance Market had a huge impact of this deployment. The price formation changes, the GHG changes, these are foundational elements of how you manage assets within the market, and it touched both day ahead and real time. When we were going through testing, I was also very concerned that some of the WEM entities weren't, not concerned, but I felt badly, like that they weren't able to go through the same process with us, because that would have also helped. Knowing that I had more folks testing real time would have given a little more assurance that we could stay focused on DAME. So we tried to test DAME, others tried to test EDAM more. but we didn't really have, we had one or two brave folks who jumped into the real time who were overachievers. But for the most part, it was just nobody was focused on it. And so we didn't have that. And if we have more WEM entities going forward, participating, they need to also be prepared for how their real-time operations are going to be impacted as the day ahead changes. But this price formation deployment fundamentally changed real time. The other thing that's highly underreacted to is the day ahead to real time. So there are new elements of the design that are impacting kind of what I think of as the processes in between our day ahead market and our real time market, which we think of as starting with 15-minute market. We have short-term unit commitment runs. We have an hour ahead scheduling process. There's been an underreaction to how those are impacted and how those are working. So turn your eyes on that. We also have new deviation payments from imbalance reserves and flexible ramping product. Don't hear enough people talking about that. And just price formation. One thing that I haven't heard enough people raise is like there's data that was on Oasis that was removed with the deployment. That's made it a lot more difficult to kind of understand the price formation of those marginal energy costs. That we used to have access to binding transfer shadow prices, which really helped understand what direction of a transfer, like what were the transfers which transfers were binding in what direction, driving the separation. It's an important piece of the fundamentals driving the real time. So now that we're in day ahead and we have a day ahead in real time, we don't have that transparency anymore. So we're losing insight into price formation. There's other examples. I know very technical people who are struggling to understand why the prices are clearing the way they're clearing. So it's not just the policies and the very technical market experts. There's a gap, I think, even between the experts being able to understand what's happening. And so if we could bridge that gap too, that'd be great.
All right. How many seconds do I have here? So I'm going to just add something different, and lots of people are looking at the market results. And I suppose I wanted to highlight also, if that wasn't obvious, Pacific made a deliberate choice when we went live. There's a lot of spring outages, both, on generation. So we actually went live with a lot of our generation on outage. We also had transmission outages, major transmission outages. So some of the questions I've gotten is like, oh my goodness, there's so much price separation. What's happening here, right? So the transfers and the transfer capacities are really important. We are at PAC, a lot of like our Brattle study assumed a lot of transfer capabilities from a lot of other entities together. Right now, it's just us and the CAISO, and they're modest. And so I wanted to just point that out. And then B, the reality that I like to tell my staff is we just got done building a very new, cool car, and the operators are learning to drive it. And I think they're getting a little more, now that they have a little bit of learnings. We're still discovering stuff every day. But, over the next month or two, as we get into the summer, I think we should anticipate people becoming more firm in their kind of decision making. There's a lot of concerns about, self-scheduling. I'll speak about that tomorrow, but there's a lot of other reasons to self-schedule resources and do that in this current stage and the maturity of the market also. But so just back to Kalia for that, just to kind of highlight.
Yeah, no, thank you. And with that, maybe we'll turn it over to the audience before our last question.
Sounds good. No. Are these open?
Yeah, you can try.
Does this work? Okay.
I can hear you.
Okay. So for those on the phone, if you could queue up, I'll go ahead and ask the first question. I think Kathleen, you mentioned vendors. And so I was wondering, you said engage them early so that you have time to test in the process. How early would you engage the vendors to make sure that you're on the schedule and ready to go and have everything tested for go live? I might do popcorn to Heled for that, but I'll start with, is one of the things I've been curious about is how early could we pull them in? I think from our perspective as a customer, it's difficult. It's really difficult for us to impact that. And it'd be great to hear from the ISO.
Yeah, I think the earliest, the better. And it's like this time, we tried also to be more efficient by getting the California ISO directly involved with the vendors of the EDAM entities and the other market participants. We had workshops for the vendors themselves to ask like direct questions. We felt that that helped a lot in terms of expediting because we were moving on a very expedite. Yeah, the implementation was in a fast pace. So we had to do some things like that. But what we found is that we can cut the time between the entity and the vendors and the California ISO and try to decrease, that miscommunication and misunderstanding and get direct communication with the entity in the room, but the vendor can have that opportunity to ask directly about those interfaces and different system changes, particularly in the scheduling and tagging. And of course, the settlements, usually it is, once we publish the configuration guide, that's what the vendors want. But in this case, because of the changes that we had to do, so that's why we had to do more changes after we published the final one. And that created, and we totally understand that. But typically, once you publish the configuration guide, the settlement vendor, but the system vendors, those we have to engage with them as soon as we start, the tracks.
Yeah, I think perhaps the only thing I would add is I think for the class of 27, beyond PGE, they're kind of already in the middle of all of these things. But for the class of 27 and beyond, the vendors were, partnering with the CAISO and us to essentially stand up their programs, right? And they write the code and their design, and the folks actually putting the zeros and the ones in there. They also had to learn what the BRSs are, and they would change still. So they have now scaled that. They have things that work. They have their software platforms and their products, probably a long list of enhancements, but I would anticipate post PGE, there will still be some enhancements, and then a lot of the vendors will be much more production ready for, for anybody coming after, I would say.
Any other questions? You can just prop your name tag up so I can see. While we wait, is there any questions on the phone, online? Oh, hold
Don't
on. I
have any
think we'll,
hands raised in the queue.
okay, hold on. We have Dan Williams. Thank you.
Thank you. Excellent panel. I think listened to a number of these, and this has been kind of the most information-rich one that's come out. So that's been excellent. The question I wanted to ask is Dan Williams from the Energy Authority was just what has changed or what has evolved for you in your, what I like to call the pre-dam activity, the pre-day ahead market, things that are going on. That could be gas trading, could be hub-based index trading. Kind of how are your entities engaging with those like 5 a.m. to 7 a.m. hours?
It's a great question. Maybe John mentioned that at least for those of us who have power plants in California, already in the day ahead, one of the things about that is I don't think our the day ahead markets has shifted as much in that morning time frame. What I believe has most been impacted is really the planning. So it's kind of like the day or so before and trying to be more prepared and responsive to the new market and kind of just learning as things are changing is what I'm seeing.
I think good question, by the way. Thank you, Dan. I would say I mentioned our gas, kind of our learning curve on the gas side for our merchant is a real one. And I think for entity, I know a lot of folks have storage. We do not. So that complicates it as a different kind of an environment there. I would say the other, it's that morning activity and coordinating all of these things. But then there's also kind of in the afternoon, the tagging. I think we were all really, really worried about just what was going to happen with tagging. It turns out with a lot of automation and kind of templates, and these are professionals that know how to do this. It's actually significantly less
of a chaotic process that we had anticipated or feared. So that's good. But in the morning, I would say the biggest implication had been on the gas.
And maybe as the onboarding, the trade-off between day ahead and real time is a challenge, a learning curve. Also moving from 5 days to 7 days, holidays. There's a lot of different changes in the planning process for both the I'll say like the balancing authority and the transmission side, not just like the merchant as well. Yeah, good question. Deborah, did you still have a question? No, okay. Are there any other questions in the room?
Yeah, also I would probably add that for the WEIMs, maybe, that are adjacent to the EDAM entity that is onboarding, there is some attention that they have to pay, especially in the way that the base schedule is being submitted before the EDAM is live versus what will happen after the EDAM and after that EDAM entity joined the market. There are changes in how the scheduling is done. And so we would like the WEIMs to pay attention and maybe even participate in what we call parallel operation. I mean, by the way, we call it parallel operation, like similar to how in the energy management EMS is parallel operation makes sense because you are using the same telemetry data that for both production and this new system. In the market world, there's no parallel operation. It's either they're submitting to the production or to non-production. So there is data still missing or lack of data and participation that we see on what we call our parallel operation. So I'd like to encourage everybody to participate. I would like to also say that, hey, we are in this together. California ISO cannot do it by themselves. And we have to have this kind of partnership, this kind of openness that I'm hearing today, and the things that I'm writing notes so that we can take the lesson learned for the next onboarding and what is needed, improve our training and our client representatives. They will be, and the training department will add more of those topics to the training material, so that people can have even more opportunities to talk. But we're making notes in order to ensure that all of these issues, the price formation and all of that, we totally understand those are complex concepts. This is the most advanced market design and formulation that anybody has. So we do expect that we have to do more communication, more training, even for ourselves. We are trying also, sometimes we get cases where we say, well, what is happening here? Why the price is like that? Why the dispatch? And we learn a lot by going into those cases. Well, thank you.
Well, we covered a lot of technical ground. So maybe to end on a lighter note, on the spirit of notes, as Colette had said, if you could leave a Post-it note 6 months before go live to yourself, what would that say? And like, Khaled, maybe I'll start with you since you brought up notes. We'll get you into practice right now. What would it say?
For me, the most important thing, at least from my, I'm not only leading the technology, I'm leading the whole implementation from beginning to end. I think the commercial implication of any market design or features that we introduce in the market needs to be understood from the beginning. In particular, this inter-tie bidding that we were surprised as an implementation team that we are implementing it. And then we found out, oh, no, this is changing a lot of business and commercial. And even though some people are saying, okay, well, it may be a good thing or a bad thing, but we are not ready for it. So I think we need to take that into consideration and give our market participants enough time to adjust their business processes based on the new market design. Thank you.
Pick up the milk. I would actually say that initially we were very focused, or at least my group is very focused on the sort of the CAISO BAA prices, and it took us a little bit of time to realize actually we want to be interested in the broader set of the EDAM prices, and there's a lot of information there. So initially we were very sort of narrow because hey, these are our assets, these are where we're SE, this is our RA. But from a market design perspective, I wish my team had built out its dashboard much more broadly than it did initially.
Mine would be no is a gift. And what I mean by that is, I do regulatory affairs policy for my company, right? And I didn't, until a month before go live, I didn't have, I think I will say, the courage to say what I believed, which was I needed to stop working on policy and regulatory efforts because that wasn't as important as being prepared for go live. And it was hard to say that because that's not my core job. And there were a lot of efforts going on, because I cover the entire West, but even if you zoom in on California, it's CAISO, the CPUC, CEC, IPER. And so I had to set a boundary, and I wasn't sure if it would be approved. I did get approved to take a month off of that and focus on go live. And that was a very rewarding experience. But my no is a gift is I wish I had said that 6 months before, not 1 month before. And I wish, so one that maybe, because it is my core job, if I can make it, I would really like to ask the RIF, when you do your policy roadmap for 2027, to seriously consider that friction where, you might have, we need to bridge the gap between the policy people and those operating and implementing. And to do that, we need the policy people to have bandwidth to do that, which means we're going to have to be we're really going to have to prioritize, and it might be painful. And there might be things we want to have happen that you're going to have to say no as a gift to us. And I'm giving you permission to say no as a gift.
Okay, I'll be quick. I would say Post-it note, pick the right team, empower the team, go to the gym. Thank you.
Thank you. Big round of applause for the panelists.
Thank you. Okay, we'll head to our brief break. We'll be back at 2:45.
This is the one. Oh, thank you. Yeah.
Oh, it is, no, but it's a little less interesting.
Oh, no, yeah, I have to go back.
That's what I heard.
It's great.
Yes, thank
Good stuff. Looking forward to the next 6 months.
Where's my?
Yeah. Matt, where's your? Oh, there we go. He's here.
Right?
Our event coordinator is picking up the slides, so just say their slides and show it.
Awesome. Thanks.
Well, 3 times. This thing's big.
I don't know. Can you hear me? Okay. Yes, this is working. Okay, so we are gonna go ahead and get started. Stacy, are we live with the meeting online?
We are.
Thank you. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and transition to the next panel on intertype bidding. And I have here Kavya and John, who will be the 2 moderators for this panel. So I'll turn it over to, I'm not sure which one, but one of you to kick this off.
Sounds good. I'll just give a quick intro to the panel and then hand it off to each of our panelists. We'll be doing this one a little bit differently. We'll have each of our panelists give an opening presentation just to describe their perspectives, and then we'll save some time for moderator questions and then leave time for audience questions as well. So slightly different format, but hopefully the same conversation, transparent conversation style collaboration situation. My name is Kavya Niranjan. During my day job, I like this idea of separating the RIF liaisons' day jobs from our RIF jobs, though they are obviously very closely related. I'm the Markets and Transmission Policy Manager at Renewable Northwest, but I represent the public interest subsector on the Regional Issues Forum. Some of you may be wondering, I'll pass it off shortly to John to introduce himself, but also to give a short opening presentation for the panel. Some of you may be wondering why the intertie bidding topic. Just wanted to make sure those of you that aren't tracking the policy catalog as closely as the RIF liaisons in particular are, but certainly others are too. But the intertie bidding topic was submitted into this year's CAISO policy and catalog process by a handful of entities from multiple sectors. So this is certainly a topic that was of interest across sectors. And so it seemed a really ripe topic to bring to the RIF around this time. And again, just want to reiterate what Lindsay mentioned up top. This is meant to be an educational session. Just wanted to start the conversation, get everyone familiar with what it is that we're actually talking about, and again, highlight some of maybe the diverse perspectives that we have on this topic. So John is going to give our opening presentation. I will then pass it to Carrie Bentley, representing WPTF, who will help explain their submission into the policy catalog, but also cover sort of the market policy aspect of this. Hannes Pfeifenberger will go next. He is joining us virtually he's representing the Brattle Group, and he will talk a little bit more about the sort of technical aspect of this. And then we'll pass it to Matt Vecti from Pattern Energy, who will give us a little bit of a case study on why this is important to a specific project that Pattern is working on. And then last but not least, to Daniel Copes of Pacific Corp, who will help us keep things in balance a little and talk a little bit about the risks and uncertainties that might be involved if we implement this too quickly or without adequate consideration. So hopefully that's a good introduction. I will pass it to John.
Good afternoon. Can we go to the first slide, please? Or the next first slide. Beyond the border. Well, good afternoon, members of the Western Energy Markets Governing Board, CAISO staff, CAISO colleagues, and various stakeholders, our fellow stakeholders here, members of the RIF. I'm Jonathan Rumble. I'm RIF sector liaison for the participating transmission owner sector, which when I joined the RIF, what does that mean? So, oh, those are the California IOUs and LSCs. We just thought that they needed a different name so they would get confused. But I volunteered to help Kavya with this panel because frankly, I didn't really understand what intertie bidding was and why all these people were putting it into the roadmap, suggesting we need to talk about intertie bidding and we need to talk about it now. And I volunteered because I wanted to learn more and, necessarily understand what all the hubbub was about. I'm a representative of California Utility. Some people may think we bring a different perspective than other stakeholders. But frankly, we're all part of, an ever broadening market, and we are actually all in this together. And we all want, the electric system to work as efficiently, as least cost, and as cleanly as we can possibly serve our customers. And I think that's really important, when we're here with the RIF and we're here with the Western Energy Markets governing body and the CAISO and I think, some folks talked about it on the last panel, we really are in this together and we need to bring our different perspectives. We need to have the opportunity to discuss, some pretty hefty topics that maybe we don't all have sort of the same level of understanding of, and certainly probably not aligned on how what the future may look like in terms of regionalization and coordination and the such. But today, as my notes say, as an economist, I want to step away from the politics of it all and really focus on just a couple of things. And that is, and this is why the educational aspect, it's the physics of the transmission system in the raw data on our OASIS portals, right? This is what we're talking about today. We're not here saying what is the right way for different balancing areas to interact. We're not here to say what the future needs to look like. We're here to really have a conversation about what is the importance of those, I don't want to use the word seams. I've heard it once or twice already today, but what is important is on how we're interacting throughout the West. And it's a really important subject. Okay, next slide, please. So when we talk about intertie bidding, we're really just talking about the valves controlling the power flow between the balancing areas. So you can just sort of imagine that you have interties. We have Oregon, we have California, we have Nevada, we have balancing authority areas within each of those, multiple within each of those states, Washington, Idaho, and they come together. There are physical seams. And so when we're talking about the interties and the bidding at interties, we're talking about how does the power actually move between those seams, right? Between those entities, between those balancing authorities. And so historically, the West has relied on the OAT framework, and it still exists today. And it really is the, contract paths, legal agreements where, holding a reservation means you have the key, you have the right to that wire. You can move energy on that wire. You have, contracts. I have a contract, but it is evolving, and it's evolved in the East with some success. Other examples not as successful. Hannes can talk about that a little bit, but as we have these expanding regional day-ahead markets, we're moving a little bit away from the physical sovereignty of it all, and maybe a little bit more into the financial stewardship of it all. And so I don't want to say dark ages, future state. That's not what we're trying to say. We're saying that the nature of the relationships is evolving, and that we're really moving from this world of sort of physical padlocks into maybe a system that a little bit more financial check, a little bit, utilizing congestion revenue allocation. Everybody's favorite topic, and we'll have some conversation about that. But it's important that as we broaden as a region, as we interact on beyond the real-time market into the day-ahead market, the way that we interact is going to have to change. It's more complicated. And can that OAT system really support this broadened interactions. Remains to be seen. Next slide, please. So, as I was saying, front and center, we have EDAM, we have DAME. Things are moving forward. There's another potential regional market in the West with Markets Plus. And there's that many more interactions that are expected to happen. I hate metaphors, but I'm going to give you one. So, because this is torture. Just as an airport must expand its capacity and upgrade its systems while continuing to land flights safely, we have to continue to optimize the Western grid and its infrastructure without actually stopping, without pausing our daily operations. And this is sort of the challenge that we face every day in policy space as well. It'd be a lot easier if we could just start all over again and write it out, but we can't, right? The planes are landing, the planes are taking off, and we have to, continue to optimize. We have to continuously improve. We have to continually address how our interactions are occurring and how they may get better, for the benefit of our customers, right? This isn't for profits. This isn't for politics. This isn't for ego. This is for the benefit of our customers. I think that's sort of a grounding principle here. And consequently, as we broaden the regional energy markets, and the external borders are kind of disappearing, right? These are more about internal transfers, and we can see that today in EDAM. We just talked about transfers. Khaled talked about, okay, we're actually seeing energy move in the day ahead market. We've seen it in the EIM for a while, but now we're seeing it in the day ahead. Oh, this is interesting. But let's get these interactions right. Are we really getting these interactions right? Is there more that we need to address, need to talk about, bring greater comfort to it? But there was 2020, right? In August of 2020, there was a heat wave, and there were speculative imports, and they didn't show up, and there was severe disruption in the system, blackouts, brownouts, but rolling blackouts. That's a real concern. That's not a piece of paper that says, hey, this is what's wrong with or what potentially could go wrong with advanced automation. This is, well, actually, we tried to do some economic transactions and economic optimization, and it didn't work. So the lesson learned from that, we have to work harder. We have to work better. We have to harmonize. And it's that harmonization that, it's not a negotiation, it's a harmonization. It's us coming together as stakeholders and saying what works for all of us to bring us to the point where we are able to, make our interactions that much more efficient and effective. Next slide, please. In this, again, this impacts all of us. Transmission owners like PacifiCorp, there's a potential for losing out on legacy wheeling revenue. You don't want to see out-of-state market flows displacing your local reliability. You want to make sure that that internal network uplifts are being absorbed by your customers. You want to make sure that your customers are being made whole. You don't want the benefits of your customers' investments to flow out of your state. And we don't want that in California. We don't want that in Nevada. We don't want that in Idaho. The customers have, funded our capital programs for century. And, they have a right to, receive the benefits from that. And so how do we take that into account when we're designing, these sort of systems of the future? And for independent power producers like Pattern, they also need to know that they have invested an immense amount of money in wind and the transmission assets to bring that wind to load, and they don't want to be trapped. They can't be trapped. If they're trapped, if that energy can't get to where it needs to go, then this is the last big SPTO. And we're not going to have a conversation whether the SPTO is the right way to go or not. But it will be a marker if we can't get that energy out into load. And so it's really important that, we're bringing, independent power producers like Pattern so that we understand, well, how is this impacting them? And then lastly, our regulators and our board members, right? And there's a lot of public policy that rely on, making sure that we are interacting in a way that state policies are being put forward. In California with state policies, Washington has state policies, Arizona, New Mexico. We all have, our own flavor of where we want the state's energy economies to go. And necessarily, we need to be designing and thinking about interties, thinking about how we're coming together in order to support those, and we can do it. Right? It's just a matter of having that conversation. And last slide, please. Or maybe that is the last slide. Oh, yeah. Sorry. And so where do we want to go with this? This is, as I said, it's a harmonization. This is not a negotiation. This should not be a political. I got in trouble for saying, oh, so it's like a negotiation. No. It's not. It's a technical and economic harmonization. And, so we need to take our market and our market rules, and we need to have them work with the actual physics of the Western interconnection, right? In a way that, respects the states, in a way that respects our customers, in a way that encourages the continued sort of forward momentum and push that we're experiencing right now. I think, again, the last month and a half has been amazing, and we want to continue this. And this conversation is part of that sort of continuation. It's like, okay, we're doing things, but now let's come back together. Let's harmonize. Let's talk. Let's figure out what's going to work for all of us to get to the place where we need to go, where our system is working together, and it's working together for all of us. So ultimately, we must ask, are our current intertime market structures designed only to manage sort of 500 megawatts, plug and play? I think California in about 2006, we got a little bit of trouble, lost 5-0 when we tried to, I think was it Devers, Colorado River. It's just an extension cord. And we don't want extension cords, right? We want, the 3,000 megawatt super highways. We want to move energy from where it's cheapest to generate in the best way to our load centers so that we are serving our customers. And so there's my passionate speech. Thank you.
On to me. Well, John, per usual, I agree with about 80% of that and strongly disagree with another 20%. But that's very normal. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm Carrie Bentley. I represent the Western Power Trading Forum. WPTF is a nonprofit organization dedicated to transparency and competition across the West. I run what's called the CAISO committee. So I follow and advocate for WPTF on behalf at the CAISO. And many of you in this room are members. We have load serving entities, we have EDAM entities, we have generators, we have banks, financial players, owners and operators. Everyone who really believes in markets, I would say, probably joins our committee. And if you can go to my slide, that would be great. Oh, and I probably just, so my members, I have to get this out here. Elephant in the room, John. August 2020, just, oh my God, speculative imports. There are people who agree with John and there are people who strongly disagree with John. And just for an informational section, the CAISO, the CEC, and the CPUC have a wonderful overview of August 2020 that I do think is relevant and worthwhile to review as we talk about intertie bidding. So for the sake of education, I strongly recommend people read that document. All right,
Sorry.
my first slide, please.
I think it's going to be forward a couple of slides.
All right, one more. One more. Thanks. Okay, so as was said, many people, many organizations put into the catalog process a request about seams. But given the wonderful panel we had before this, I actually want to quote Kalia. And she said that we really need a culture change around what a market is. And I actually think that is what we are asking for in an initiative. We are asking for the CAISO to have a broad-based initiative that says, what is a market across the entire West? Because that includes a lot more people and a lot of different perspectives. And so when we start talking about seams, which by the way, I don't think seams should be a dirty word. I think seams is just another way of saying the energy market is bigger than the CAISO. The energy market is bigger than the EDAM, and we need to acknowledge that in our market design. And so when WPTF is talking about market seams, we're just asking for an inclusive space where everyone can provide their opinion and perspective in the market design as we go forward with intertype bidding. So high level, that's what we're asking for. More specific, we're identifying 2 areas of seams, internal seams and external seams. And I know you could call them different things, but the first one is just the market seams that exist between the CAISO balancing area and the EDAM entities themselves. As we continue expansion, as we have to change again how we transact across borders, it's adding complexity, not just to the physical power flows and the power flow modeling, but also, Christine, mind the gap, right? It's also adding complication between our regulatory market design and our commercial activities. And if we don't bridge that, we lose the efficiencies of EDAM. So we're asking for an initiative that looks at that continually and brings in all those perspectives. Secondly, we're asking for a look eventually, maybe it's not today, maybe it's not tomorrow, but eventually at external seams. That is on the border of EDAM. How do we make sure we could efficiently transact with the rest of the West? I don't think seams are a dirty word. I don't think we could just ignore that Markets Plus is coming. I don't think we could ignore that there's still going to be bilateral transactions and that liquidity is shrinking in these markets. And if you have liquidity shrinking in markets, you're going to increase costs, you're going to increase transaction costs, and no one wants that. No one wants the benefit of EDAM to be the detriment of the rest of the West. What we want is lower cost for ratepayers across the entire West. And I truly believe that's why everyone is in this room, is because we believe that you can solve reliability through markets and you could also have market efficiency through markets. That means lower costs, right? That's what we all get excited about. So we are just asking for this initiative to say, given these different perspectives, how can we all come into a room and acknowledge it is the market design that matters, is the market design that really leads to these efficiencies. Next slide, please. So this is a little bit more detail, but I think this is everything I just said. So we can go one more slide. Got ahead of myself, I apologize. All right, and this is from the WPTF perspective. And this is about what we believe about the CAISO market optimization. And so this is the perspective that we bring to market design. So when you talk about the physics of the transmission system, how does power move? What we say is what's really important is you figure out the physics of the transmission system and you say, how do you optimize those physics? And the theory of an ISO, the reason I assume EDAM entities are joining why we have WEM is because we believe in the energy market. And the way, kind of as an economist, the energy market works is it ensures least cost dispatch by getting resources to bid their marginal costs, opportunity costs, and risks. What that does is reveal the true price of a generator. And so the market is actually able to take into account constraints, losses, and true revealed prices, revealed willingness to provide power, and say, I'm going to dispatch the most efficient resource. Now, when we move to the day-ahead market, that's primarily a financial market. No one's actually moving power in the day ahead. What we're trying to do is best set up our long start resources. We're trying to make sure that we have sufficient fuel for our gas plants ahead of time. And primarily the function really is, do we have enough long start generation on for reliability? And financially, are we set up appropriately to not lose money? Are we most efficiently planning our grid ahead of time, knowing there's uncertainty, knowing constraints are going to pop up? And so when we move into the real-time market, we know things are going to change. We know there will be outages. We know there will be congestion. We know in California in particular, variable energy resources are going to have less sun or less wind or more than we thought. So really what Day Ahead is doing is it's fixing long start commitment, and everything else is just kind of a forecast for real time. And that's important because when you start trying to really accurately model power flows in Day Ahead, there are no flows to model. And so when we talk about intertie bidding in the day ahead, it's really important to WPTF to keep in mind what the day ahead market is. And that's primarily a financial market. Next slide, please. There we go. So what's going on at the CAISO right now? Well, right now we're in a transitional phase where in the CAISO to EDAM border, they have removed the ability to bid specifically on those interties, except for entities that have RPS or RA contracts. Basically, they've carved out a section of transactions and said these can flow, these cannot. And the justification for that had to do with power flow modeling. And so again, we're not going to get into advocacy here, but I wanted to provide how kind of we think about it. We think about the trade-off between power flow modeling accuracy and economics as, can you more accurately model power flows without distorting market economics? And our issue is that the market design right now encourages or even mandates self-scheduling. And what self-scheduling does is it prevents generators from revealing their true costs. The purpose of the market is to dispatch generators with the lowest cost. And if everyone self-schedules, the CAISO cannot dispatch these generators appropriately, and we may end up with a more expensive market, more cost to ratepayers than we need. And there is a trade-off. So what WPTF's position is that the market does not benefit prima facie, or I always get that Latin word wrong, but inherently from power flow modeling. It only benefits from more accurately modeling power flows if it means the right generators are dispatched. Next slide, please. So then finally, we move to intertie bidding at EDAM. We think that eventually that same conversation needs to be had. We understand that there's concerns with reliability. We believe those need to be addressed. There's concerns with power flow modeling. We believe those things, though, should be evaluated in that same vein of everyone's perspective, not just a narrow perspective, but the full seams, inside and outside perspective, and then making that trade-off between more accurate modeling and the market economics. And this is what we're asking for from the CAISO within this initiative. Thank you.
Yes.
I
Go ahead.
think I'm going to.
I'm sorry. Yes. Hannes, are you able to? And I think Hannes was going to share his own slides, if I remember correctly. So bear with us while we do a little bit of a transition.
First of all, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Excellent, thank you. I can try to share my slides, or I can just ask you to go through my slide, whatever is easier.
I think you can try to share your slides, and if that doesn't work, we can
share. Stacy will have to stop sharing the content before I can share. Right, so. Can you see that?
Yes, we can.
Well,
we might need to do some resize. There we go.
Perfect.
Go ahead.
Does it work?
Yes.
Okay. Let's see if I can control those. Somehow my. All right. Let me bring an Eastern perspective to it. Eastern RTOs have used intertie bidding for a long time, but intertie bidding is a small piece of the larger puzzle, and that is really inefficiencies created by market seams. Now, it's important to find out, we always had market seams. Bilateral trades is all about market seams. Every bilateral trade is going across a seam, and there's inefficiency. So when we say market seams, we're not just talking about seams between two markets, we're talking about seams between any two balancing areas. And generally, seam-related inefficiencies between markets tend to be smaller than seams-related inefficiencies in bilateral markets. Nevertheless, there are some seams-related inefficiencies that exist between our RTO markets and that will be existing between, say, Markets Plus and EDAM. One, of course, is even when you have a full RTO, there's interregional planning. That planning across seams is always harder than planning within seams. We see that generated interconnection affected system studies can become quite complicated and has been causing delays in interconnection studies because the neighboring RTO often has to weigh in. Loop flow management, that's perhaps the most important thing to consider. If you have an intertwined seam, as you will likely have with Markets Plus and EDAM, there are a lot of market-based loop flows, and managing these loop flows efficiently and reliably is perhaps a much bigger challenge than intertype bidding will be. But we do have inefficient trading across contract path market seams. Even between MISO and PJM, there's just a contract path, and trading across these eastern seams is quite inefficient, as I will show you in a moment. But this is really where intertype bidding comes in. Intertype bidding can improve energy trading efficiency across market seams, particularly in day ahead. And it's not as effective in real time, and there a tool like intertype optimization would be needed to really address inefficient trading. And then we have resource adequacy across market seams. The value of being able to exchange economy energy across market seams is often understated from a resource adequacy perspective, and that's something we need to keep in mind, but is not something we'll discuss now. I do want to emphasize briefly that whenever we talk about market seams in the West, it's usually focused on WEC internal seams. But WEC is not an island, and there are many studies that show the most impactful seam we have in the country is the seam between the WEC and the Eastern Interconnection and ERCOT. And increasing efficiency across that seam is perhaps more lucrative and more important than some of the WEC internal seams we'll be talking about, just to keep this in mind. In the East, this is our map of the emerging RTO and markets picture, including the more recent developments in the WEC. But you can see the Eastern RTOs are quite intertwined. MISO North is barely connected with MISO South, and PJM has this sort of piece in the Western footprint that's really intertwined with MISO. And because of these intertwined seams, when those ISOs were formed, FERC has actually forced them to de-pancake their seam and address planning, operations, and congestion management challenges on those seams. They have put that in place, but around 2013, when the southern part of MISO, mostly Entergy, joined the northern part of MISO, it created big loop flow problems through SPP and TVA and PJM. And there's a lot of loop flow management effort that got into, that had to be implemented at that point. And here in the West, you can really take advantage of 2 decades of seams-related experience in the East. How do we know that there are seams-related inefficiencies? Well, NREL has actually done a nice study, or maybe it was LPNL, the uneconomic flows that we see frequently, power flows going from high-priced areas to low-priced areas, particularly in real time. We see high price differences between markets when transmission isn't constrained. Often bilateral trades are just not fast enough to take advantage of these price differentials. We see underutilized transmission capacity even when flows go into the right direction and price differences are high, transmission isn't fully utilized. And there's generally a lack of transparency of these inefficiencies in bilateral trades where you don't have, hourly prices or 5-minute prices. You don't even know whether they're inefficient trades or whether, efficient trades do not happen. But with markets and the transparency of prices, you see these kinds of inefficiencies very quickly. But these trades also, create loop flows, and loop flows actually makes it harder to manage the pricing in markets and the pricing across the seams. Now, what does intertype bidding do? It's really just a tool to improve bilateral trading efficiencies. CalISO has been using it for a long time, and the Eastern RTOs have intertype trading across the seams. It's really, I think, an efficient tool to also increase the efficiencies of bilateral trades at both EDAMs and Markets Plus seams, not just between EDAM and Markets Plus, but between non-market participants and these markets. It just means you put in a bid and import and export only happens when prices justify that bid. So it really reduces the amount of trades that end up being inefficient after the fact. What we see in the East, it's quite effective a tool. In the East, we see that about 90% of all day-ahead trades are efficient. So they earn profits. They flow from lower prices to higher prices. The remaining inefficiencies often relate to complications related to loop flows and congestion management. But what we also see that intertype bidding is actually not efficient in real time. In day ahead, the price difference between neighboring markets, say MISO and PJM, changes signs about 3 to 4 times a day. In real time, these price differences change 50 to 60 times a day, so 2 to 3 times an hour. Bilateral trades, even with intertype bidding, are just not fast enough to follow real-time prices. So what we're seeing is that about 45 to 50% of all real-time transactions go the wrong way from high prices to low prices. They would incur losses. So people don't trade much in real time because of that. The ISOs try to implement a tool called coordinated transaction scheduling, where the ISOs forecast real-time prices to make bilateral trades more feasible, but it's not really working. You don't even have to figure out what coordinated transaction scheduling is, as long as you know that it has not lived up to expectations. So the West, I think, is actually better positioned to avoid seams-related trading inefficiencies than the East. And that's because, the other way around. The West is better positioned than the East. The Eastern markets have consolidated all of the balancing areas. So all of PJM is a single balancing area, all of MISO is a single balancing area. There's just a single contract path between them. So there's only a single interface between them that's priced from a congestion management perspective. But what it means that an export from the northern part of MISO to PJM is scheduled and priced the same way as an export from Louisiana to PJM. So there's some huge pricing inefficiencies associated with a single interface. In the West, the fact that you continue to have individual balancing areas means that trading points for intertide trading will necessarily be more efficient and more granular than what you have in the East. And you can continue, the trading hubs and things like that. So avoiding a single market-wide interface is really one way to make sure intertype bidding remains fairly efficient and doesn't have the challenges that you see in the East. And in the West, you have the contract path available to transfer capability. You already have shared flow gates, WEC paths, and you have transmission rights. So as long as market flows respect the transmission rights that carry those market flows, loop flows will probably be less of a problem than what you have in the East, where a lot of these contract path rights have been eliminated and markets just try to optimize without taking into consideration how much transmission they have available. But the Eastern experience also shows that in real time, intertype bidding won't really help you very much, and you really should consider what's called intertie optimization or intermarket optimization or interface optimization, the different terms for that. It's something that New York ISO and ISO New England and the market monitors have proposed about 15 years ago. They've only implemented according to transaction scheduling. And as I've told you, it's not efficient. What you have in the West with WEM is way more efficient than coordinated transaction scheduling for transactions between control areas. And now the question becomes, how about transactions between EDAM and Markets Plus, or any of these markets and non-market participants? And there are examples. The Europeans have implemented what's called market coupling to take advantage of any unutilized transfer capability that remains after bilateral trades close. So bilateral trades happen, but if once the bilateral trades close 20 minutes before real time, the two neighboring markets would optimize the remaining transfer capability. And that can be really important, because if you create a transmission between market or a merchant line, if you can't optimize that merchant line in real time, you lose about 20 to 30% of the potential energy trading value. Now, within CalISO, the subscriber PTO proposal is automating that, where any unused capacity would automatically be optimized in the CalISO market, and now presumably in EDAM. So you have that within the market, but doing something like this across market would really be necessary and beneficial. So conclusions, there are a lot of seams inefficiency. We can do better planning across the seams. We should really look at that. We have to worry about interconnections near the seams. We really need to improve the operational and congestion market impacts that loop flows impose on each other, and try to facilitate efficient trades. And lastly, I really want to emphasize resource adequacy value across seams is one way to reduce installed capacity needs, because regions with a large geographic footprint can really help each other. So with that, I turn it over to the next, and I think I have to stop sharing.
Great. Thanks, Hannes. Appreciate it. We'll go next to Matt. We'll take a second to bring the slides back up, Stacy, if that's okay.
Good afternoon.
Great.
You need to go really close to it.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Matt Vecti. I'm with Pattern Energy, and just give you a little perspective and insight into not only what and who Pattern is, but also some of the projects we've been up to and how this has a really strong correlation to interties with the CAISO market. And we'll look for that first slide, just generally describing who Pattern is. We have 30 plus assets throughout North America. So we participate in a lot of different energy markets today. We participate in Alberta, the MISO, the PJM, ERCOT, and CAISO marketplaces today. So we operate with a lot of different variety in what we see for transmission rights, what we see for seams and integration, and get a chance to hopefully leverage that experience here with intertie bidding with CAISO. And so when I look at what we have going on in the West, we have a lot of different things going on, but I want to highlight first and foremost our project, SunZia. It's the largest renewable facility here in North America, and is also coupled with a very large HVDC line. We just recently finished full completion and entry into the CAISO market, which is super exciting.
Sorry, yeah, just want to give a second for the slides to come up. So you have your background. A little more.
Early.
Yeah, nobody saw it. Nobody saw it.
Nobody saw it. Just pretend it didn't happen.
Matt, is it going to be the next slide?
Yes, please. Yeah, so here we can see we have our assets scattered throughout North America and the different markets that I was mentioning. And especially when we take a closer look at the California market and what we do in the Western energy sector, we have a lot of different options available to us. We have projects that bid directly in the CAISO market. As a bus bar, we have like the Hatchet Ridge and Ocotillo there in California. So that's one perspective, not a lot of direct transmission interaction. We have our Western Spirit Wind, Broadview Grady sites, and we enable those with transmission products a lot of the time, whether it's firm transmission or non-firm transmission. We leverage getting those exported out from the state of New Mexico and to our customers. And then the last one, which we see in there, is a very large line in there, is SunZia, and that's connecting New Mexico into Arizona from a transmission perspective.
Oh, sorry, 1 second.
Oh, it's like they're swapped from the front panels here.
Stacy, in the room, both of our projections have the same opening slide. I think one of them. Thank you.
Assuming we have time to start over.
Yes.
I will go back and highlight the SunZia transmission line that's in place there. That's enabling 3,600 megawatts of renewable generation from New Mexico to serve into the CAISO marketplace. And that is, I was just talking about our firm and non-firm transmission that we use to enable assets today. We had the unique opportunity to be the first entity to use the subscriber participating transmission owner program. And I'm very excited that we were able to be the first ones through the gates. While that was probably a lot of excitement, and to beat a dead horse on the analogy side that Jonathan used earlier about airports and airplanes, something we said a lot when we were in the last 6 months with SunZia is that we were building the airplane as we were flying it. And that definitely felt true, but it was one of those things using that SPTO framework as we built that airplane, we were able to land it safely at the airport. And we see that also in the transmission products that are available through the SPTO construct. When we look at the transmission contracts or the congestion revenue rights model that are available to the generators that subscribe to the SunZia transmission line. So there's a lot of benefit in terms of how do we, as a generator, either engage in intertie bidding or would engage in intertie bidding versus having transmission rights or a comparable type of product at an intertie. We go into the next slide. So this just helps highlight these different types of transmission products. When we talk about how do we intertie bid, there's an underlying question that I have, which is, are you showing up with some sort of transmission right? I just covered a different set of products, whether you're getting those from a typical transmission service provider like P&M or any of the others that are up there on the slide, to the way the CAISO products work. And are you showing up with those transmission products long-term, or is it short-term? And what's the level of that product? Is it firm or is it not firm? So there's a lot of what do you show up with at that intertie from a transmission perspective. And at Pattern, we are showing up with all of the different variations, and we are showing up with it at many different potential interties, whether that's common hubs we know today like Palo Verde or other ones I suspect will look like in the future. We will be showing up at those interties with all of these different transmission products. And a big part of moving that power where it's needed is around what's the transparency and what's the predictability of each of those types of products when we show up at the intertie. I think that's one part that is very clear from a toolbox perspective, what is available in the CAISO market. But as the individual entities develop their oats, like we have PacifiCorp has already developed their oat, it's filed at FERC. We have an idea of what to expect with that. There are other entities in the desert Southwest that are still developing their oats. They're on track timeline-wise with EDM entry. But at the same time, having that transparency is very key. It's not just transparency and predictability with the CAISO market. It's going to be transparency and predictability when it comes to a transmission service provider's oat. So I wanted to really highlight that as we move this power from one area to another, how key these transmission products are. And into the next slide. We have a lot of wind. So obviously we're highlighting SunZia, 3,650 megawatts of wind resource. But that's not the only wind resource we have that we're enabling. There's already a baseline of over 1,500 megawatts of generation that we use today in the state of New Mexico. And instead of using the SunZia path, it goes through the P&M system, out through Four Corners, across Arizona to Palo Verde. And when we look at that in summation, right, that's not a small amount. It's 5 gigs of energy. And when I take a look at some of the low load conditions recently in California, we're supplying over 10% of the energy to California through our wind products. So it's a huge impact for the CAISO Balancing Authority, and then correspondingly how it impacts the EDAM entities. And so when we look at how do we schedule this energy, there's a huge emphasis for us, at least, on do we have all the tools in our toolkit? And I think we'll probably touch on this in some specific questions later, but I really like Carrie's answer because that's a similar concern where we have interest in self-scheduling energy at times. We also have a huge interest in economically bidding energy, and only having half of the toolbox available to us when we're at an intertie where we can only self-schedule at an intertie would be a real drawback. We think the market has something very useful. It's got those 2 tools, but when there's only half of it available, that really draws back from what can we do commercially to enable 5 gigs of energy. So we see that as one of those really important market entry points that I will leave you all with as I turn it over for our other presenter.
All right. Let's see if mine's on.
Can we go to the next slides, please?
All right, so my name's Daniel Copas. I'm the Director of Grid Operations for PacifiCorp. I was asked to be here today because I have a little bit different perspective towards all this than probably most of the rest of the others on the panel, because I am first and foremost responsible for reliability of our system. You can go to the next slide, please. I also apologize. I don't have nearly as fancy as slides as everybody else because I'm just an engineer. And I'm just an operations guy, so I like to keep things simple and straightforward. So as everybody's aware, and we'll just touch on this real quick, from a tariff perspective, CAISO tariff allows the entities to decide whether or not they're going to allow intertie bidding. And at this time, PacifiCorp has not allowed it in our tariff. One of the reasons, we'll talk about some of the reasons for that, but basically from a simple perspective, there's concerns that we have with intertype bidding at this point. That's not to say we won't allow it in the future, but as of right now, there's concerns that need to be addressed and we need to figure out how to solve before we're going to feel comfortable with allowing it. Go ahead and go to the next slide, please. And I only have 2 slides, so it'll be the last time I say that. So as I mentioned, with it being the director of grid operations is responsible for the reliability of PacifiCor's entire system. And that is a very large transmission system, just under 17,000 miles of transmission and spanning across 8 states. And it is a very challenging system to maintain that reliability. But reliability for us is number one. And reliability for me, one of the first things that it looks like is not being in an EEA. One of my biggest concerns with intertype bidding is with the fact that the penalties as sit right now in tariffs are so minimal for not showing up with the energy. If we have intertype bidding allowed in the day ahead market and we get into a heavily resource constrained day where maybe it's more financially beneficial to whoever provided that intertype bid to redistribute that or resell it in the operational day to another entity and then not show up in the hour that or a couple hours that were planned for in the day ahead. What resources do we not have available now that would have been available if that intertype bid hadn't been there? Not to say that we couldn't allow it and then it be a beneficial reliability asset, but we need something that looks more like a traditional bilateral or day ahead market or day ahead trading, penalty where, for example, right now in our day ahead trading that we do have, if somebody doesn't show up, they're responsible for all liquidated damages associated with not providing that energy when we need it. And so if we did go, if somebody didn't provide and we went into an EEA and we had significant damages associated with it, that entity that failed to provide the power would be responsible for that. And that's not something that as of right now, we have any ability in any of our tariffs to allow for in a intertype bidding capacity. However, that's, again, it's not something that we can't solve. It is something that we need to look at before we move forward with allowing it. In addition to that, as everybody's aware, there's only 2 primary entities in EDAM right now, and there's only so much transmission between the 2. But when it comes to a PacifiCor view, to give everybody kind of a 1,000-foot view into our day-to-day operations, PacifiCor is a single BA that operates 2 BAAs. So we have 2 distinct areas in our BA, our West BA and our East BA, or BAA and BAA. Between the 2, we basically have 2 primary paths that connect them together. And as everybody's aware, our East BAA is very heavy generation, and a lot of that generation has to be moved over to our West BAA. The paths that move that power are heavily constrained at all times during high load periods because of the fact that the majority of our generation sits within our East BAA. If we allow intertype bidding at our seams, and it's possible the intertype bids could serve some of our native load, but if those intertype bids are then trying to service load in California's BA, it could further constrain those transmission paths that are already constrained during those heavy loading periods. Again, it's not something that isn't it's not something we can't find a solution for, but it is something that is challenging. So what it does is it puts a heavier reliance on a good model, an accurate model, and an accurate power flow analysis in the day ahead. And that, again, I know nobody likes talking about this, as I've heard, although I love talking about it. It's my favorite topic, but seams are the area that are the biggest concern for us. We have seams issues regularly in our system, especially our seams from what RBA has a very large seams with SPP. And that SPP seams has caused us a lot of issues in just recent years that regularly pop up. And unfortunately, where those seams lie end up energy being transferred in at those seam points have to flow on transmission lines that are already heavily constrained due to where our generation resources are. Again, it can be solved, but it's a challenge. So during these periods of increased resource scarcity, the question is how do we prevent an entity from bidding in a large amount of energy into PAC's intertie point, large enough that it results in the shutdown of a large gas unit or coal unit, because those take a very long time to come back online, but then chooses to pull the energy in the operational day and puts Pacificor into an EEA. That's not something that I can allow because an EEA is bad. We've never had one. And I really don't want to be the person in the chair when it happens, although you never know. But that's my number one goal of my career is to never have an EEA. Hopefully, maybe we'll see. So, and then finally, currently with so few entities and EDMs, PAC's investment needs to be focused on increasing reliability and costs within our own footprint while minimizing the risk to our customers to prove out benefits of our investment.
Great.
That's it.
Awesome. Well, thanks very much. I think first of all, just want to thank all of our panelists. We appreciate each of your perspectives, willingness to help us understand the implications and considerations here on this topic. I strongly suspect this won't be the first time, the last time that the RIF has this conversation. So we'll have a series of questions now. Don't want to give the impression that this is the end of the conversation, but just want to dive a little bit deeper into each of your presentations here today. So let's see. The first question is for Daniel. From a major transmission owner's perspective, the transition to automated day-ahead market transfers requires moving from absolute physical control of a path to a more financial stewardship model. What specific milestones or safeguards in the current market design, whether in the resource sufficiency evaluation or congestion revenue allocation, would give you confidence that your native load customers are protected and are being made whole for the use of their system?
Great question. First, I'm going to address the first part of the question that first and foremost, as the transmission operator for Pacificor's transmission system, we will never completely move away from an absolute physical control of path. Well, I agree that there is a higher, there is and there should be a higher focus on the financial stewardship portion of a market and of operating our system. We have to maintain reliability and we have to follow the NERC standards as stated in order to not only stay in compliance, but also to serve the customers that we are responsible to serve reliably every day. Moving on to the actual tools. So the RSE does provide us with some protection, but since it is not transmission constrained, it doesn't fully address the question that you asked there. So in addition, we also rely on the IFM and RUC since those are transmission constrained. So the three tests there are really what give us this this warm and fuzzies that we're going to be able to better serve those customers and better give them the protect them for the use of the system. However, there is a great reliance there, as I mentioned previously, on accuracy of model. Small errors in the model, especially since this is all a power flow based solution, can lead to major impacts to our customers. And so beyond that, in addition to that, I should say, one of the things that we've done at Pacificor, in my group, we've set up a team of engineers that are evaluating that model and those predicted solutions multiple days in advance in order to try to find these errors, to increase the reliability of the model, to hopefully give the best market solution possible, to find not only the errors, but also it's just a computer and computers are only as good as the inputs that are given to them. And so what inputs can we find that make that solution better? And whatever we can do to improve that solution is best. So not only are we looking at it from a day ahead or multiple day ahead perspective, from a model perspective, but we're also looking at after the fact, what did we miss? What stuff could we start looking at in the future to make this better? Because the better the model is and the better the power flow solution is, the better, the more financial, the better finances we get for our customers and for ourselves.
Sorry, just to interrupt. If folks wouldn't, I'm sorry, Stacy, I think while we're doing the Q&A portion, it might be helpful to have everyone's names, the slide with everyone's names on it pulled up again, if that's not too much trouble to get to. But in the meantime, go ahead, John.
Thanks, Kavya. That's you know, I understand where you're coming from, Daniel, and just want to, for all the people out in Etherland, the CPUC and the CEC and folks identified that the reason for 2020 was broad and had much more to do with, you know, an extremely hot year and RA gaps and maybe a lack of load showing up in the day ahead market, not simply RA specific or non-specific RA resources being oversold. So just to clarify that, sometimes we want to speak in a little bit of hyperbole to get everybody engaged in a panel conversation. So, but I want to transfer over to you, Carrie, and just following up on what Daniel said. You know, the better the powerful modeling, the better, you know, he believes the financial outcomes are. You know, but that's not always, this is the tension, right? And we've recently seen, you know, CAISO pull back a little bit from what the gap time modeling and really to prioritize the participant predictability during this EDAM transition. But from a policy standpoint, you know, how do we balance it? So we've addressed it. We say we do need to balance it, but let's talk. Can we talk a little bit about how we do balance that sort of need for economic certainty, but or I guess the practical reality of market rules, and you know the need for as accurate as powerful modeling. What's that balance look like, if I may?
Yeah, maybe once again, I'll pull back a little bit and say, you know, the perspectives on what a market is really will lead to, I think, talking past each other. So we have to be really clear about what we're talking about. So you come from a world where you're used to scheduling in the day ahead. You know your coal plant is going to run. And so if you more accurately model that power flow in the day ahead, you are inherently more accurately modeling actual flows. Now, when we move to a CAISO market, that isn't true anymore because you have a lot more economic bidding and you have a lot more changes between the day ahead and real-time market. So now, just because you're more accurately modeling the day ahead doesn't mean you're actually more accurately modeling what real-time conditions will be. And so when I start to make these trade-offs, what I look at is not just, are you more accurately modeling your forecast of real time, but are you modeling what actually occurs in real time? And that conversation is different when you have changes between day ahead and real time. So I completely agree with you that we get to a better solution if we're able to better model power flows in real time. But my point is that better power flow modeling in day ahead doesn't necessarily equal that. And we have to be really careful in a market that has such changes between day ahead and real time, these constraints, these power flows switching between imports and exports, between BAs, that we're not conflating the two.
Maybe I could weigh in on this too. First of all, it's absolutely important to keep reliability in mind because a lot of market engines don't get reliability perfectly right. And sometimes operators have to intervene where the market engine isn't so smart enough to see some reliability challenges. But at the same time, I have to say markets are also very good at addressing reliability needs through the price signals they send. I think everybody would probably agree that WEM has actually improved reliability because it mobilizes resources over a much larger footprint that individual BAs wouldn't have access to. With respect to imports and intertype bidding, one has to realize that if one makes a day-ahead bid and wins that, and then in real time there's a challenge showing up, backing out of your day-ahead obligation in real time might expose you to, $1,000 or $2,000 LMPs imbalances plus a 50 to 75% penalty charge on top of that. So it's very costly to back out of a day-ahead schedule in real time when there is scarcity. So I would say what we've seen in the East, intertype bidding has not created reliability challenges. It can actually help because you might have some intertype bids coming in very high. So if your balancing area has a problem, it can attract those imports that otherwise wouldn't be scheduled bilaterally. So I think one, of course, has to monitor this very quickly. One can't make too many changes all at once, because I'm more concerned about the parallel flow impacts that markets impose on each other that individual balancing areas might struggle to deal with than I would be concerned about the reliability implications of day-ahead imports that don't show up in real time.
Great. Our next question, Hannes, is actually for you. So if you could stay off mute. And then Matt, I think we'll come to you next. Hannes, the Eastern RTO spent nearly 2 decades smoothing out interface pricing and automated market-to-market seams coordination. Based on that historical experience, what are the most critical blind spots the West needs to avoid as we try to harmonize centralized market optimization with a deeply rooted bilateral history?
Well, as I said, in some ways, the West is already set up better for some of this, particularly for intertype bidding, because if all of MISO and PJM transacts over a single contract path, over a single interface, even though you have a huge diversity in geography, that's just not as a good setup. But that's what people are struggling with. The other thing that is perhaps more important is how the Eastern markets manage parallel flows. PJM's market imposes parallel flows on MISO and vice versa. And in the East, all the transmission rights were sort of put away, and shares of flow gates were allocated to neighboring markets. So PJM has rights to use constrained facilities in MISO up to a certain limit. And those limits have been set based on historical power flows that have almost nothing to do with where the market is now. So you have these congestion management related to parallel flows that are actually not all that efficient, where MISO is paying SPP for parallel flows and vice versa, even though the constraints aren't managed as well as they would be if they were all inside a single RTO. I actually think that is going to be easier in the West because you're not eliminating the transmission rights, and markets have to impose flows that are not larger than the transmission that they have available. And that, I think, will actually be very helpful. So I think the starting point in the West is already avoiding a lot of the problems that the Eastern RTOs have experienced, have been trying to resolve over the last 20 years.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Hannes. We have one more question over here for Matt, and then we'll take some from the audience and online. I think online we have a volunteer for the next intertype bidding panel as well. Sorry. Matt, as you look at the really the evolving landscape of EDAM's transmission buckets and the footprint of Markets Plus, what does a predictable market scene look like to a developer? And how would you describe maybe the middle ground that allows the independent power producer to be able to flow efficiently, maybe between the two, without necessarily overriding legacy transmission commitments? What's the predictable scene for you?
I think the most predictable part is going to be around that price formation. This has come up quite a bit in the last several months when we look at intertie bidding, but specifically for a generator, especially with a multi-segmented bid pair segment, like we frequently do a pattern. We need to have a very clear expectation that this is the price that's going to be at the intertie. This is the price that's going to be at the generator node, and how to arrive at that type of conclusion. So when we put in a bid at a specific price, we have confidence that that is going to be the economic outcome that we're looking for. And that price formation is really key. I don't know how to hammer that home just a little bit more, especially when we look at we're oriented towards doing a lot of economic bidding in our projects.
So you today, do you feel as though you see sufficient opportunities for that economic bidding for your projects, or are there, does the middle ground exist somewhat today?
The middle ground exists to a degree when we look at the transmission products that are out there, because we'll back generation flows with transmission products. So it's a costly middle ground to do that. And I think that's one of the reasons I talk about the price formation being important, because there'll be times when we're looking at price formation just from a generator perspective, but then we also add on the fact that we have to pay for transmission in some instances so that we can enable the transaction. And so understanding when it's just a generation formation and then when it's generation and transmission is going to be a big part of how we look at that.
Great. Thanks. We do have more questions we could ask, but I do want to be mindful of time. We have until 4:15. Maybe we can see if there are any questions either in the room or virtually. I see one right away from Lindsay in the room, so maybe we can start there. Go ahead.
Okay, this has been a great discussion so far. So Lindsay Schleckaway with NV Energy. I'll start first with the comment because I was a little surprised, I'll be honest, from Hannes's presentation, how it's better situated that we're actually the individual BAs in the West than the East. So from my perspective, I guess at least I'll state this. I think I guess it was my understanding that it would be more of a challenge because of keeping the BAs. We do have the large footprint if we, get a large footprint within the market to share share resources and that diversity if the market or if the BA were to get into trouble. However, it is my understanding that if an intertie bid were to get a BA into, into a trouble area, that the market would help out by sending resources through the transfers. However, it wouldn't cause another BA to go infeasible in order to help serve that BA. It would actually allow the BA that is going infeasible, having the problem, to actually have those issues. And so that is, I guess, one thing that at least makes me a little bit nervous about the whole intertie bidding area, and something that if you don't have one huge footprint sharing in that responsibility, that it could be all within one BA. And then the other complication I see is just if you allow the intertie bids, and maybe this is just my lack of understanding, but I just would want to make sure that there isn't some sort of issue with the transmission revenue, and that generators wouldn't, or the bilateral transactions that occur, currently the transmission is paid for, and there's a certain, I just would want to make sure that the transmission costs wouldn't get shifted from one customer class to another or have those sort of issues. So it's something I guess we may need to think about, but that would be another concern that I would have considering the current situation that we have today.
Well, maybe I can start with that. On that last question, Pat might have some thoughts, but starting with the last question, I think if somebody has a long-term contract, they'll have to pay for that, whether they use it or not, or they can release it on short notice, of course. But that's really not all that different than what we have with just self-scheduled bilateral transaction. It's just that the with intertype bid, in my mind, the simple thing is that the schedule will only be accepted if the market price supports that import or export. About the BAAs, where I think you are better off in the West is that the markets are already constraining market flows to available transfer capabilities, so they don't exceed the rights that exist within a market, and that will help from a loop flow management and reliability perspective. From a modeling accuracy perspective, it really helps to know whether a CalISO intertype bid comes in at Palo Verde or at knob. And you can maintain that in the West because you maintain the balancing areas. If you only had CalISO and another market in the West as single balancing areas, you wouldn't know where the power would actually be coming from. There's only one contract. If there was only one intertie into and out of CalISO, that would be much more challenging because in the East, folks don't know whether the power that's exported into PJM on a schedule will ultimately come from North Dakota or Louisiana. And that kind of modeling uncertainty creates bigger reliability challenges than a import or an export not showing up, in my mind, because financially there are pretty significant consequences if people don't show up. In terms of the BAAs having to fend for themselves, there's of course a disadvantage of maintaining your own BAAs, but at least WEM will take care of a lot of that down to the 5-minute level. And I think that's enough of a protection that I don't see maintaining the individual BAAs to be a huge disadvantage from a reliability perspective. But of course, we'll learn more about this. Although I have to say, with WEM, we already know a lot about what those reliability issues mean, because even with self-scheduled bilateral transactions, you can't always rely on them showing up because the exporting balancing area might have to curtail them.
Did any of our other panelists want to chime in on that, or? Okay. Any questions online or any other questions in the room? I'm not sure I'm seeing any hands. Stacy, correct me if I'm just missing something on my screen.
We do not have any hands raised.
No hands raised?
No hands raised.
Okay.
Well, let's ask another question.
Yes.
We've got more.
Go ahead.
So I'll ask it to the panel generally. How will regulators and or CAISO know whether the lack of intertie bidding is producing adverse or even unjust and unreasonable outcomes? And what are those metrics that are available to quantify, that could quantify the benefits of adopting greater intertie bidding flexibility? Let's call it. Is there, how do we measure this? How do we know what we're doing is doing?
I'm looking at Hannes.
Hannes, would you like to go?
Well, I would have expected the other question around how do regulators know the inefficiencies that we can't achieve because we don't have intertie bidding? How much better could we do with trades across market seams? And I think that is easier to figure out between two markets because you have very transparent price signals. And if there are a lot of price differences and no flow or flows going the wrong way, it will indicate that the schedules or the transactions between the two markets are inefficient, and we can do better than that. In terms of how do we know if something doesn't work? Well, I mean, I'm sure there will be challenges that we'll encounter with the creation of these markets and these themes. Just like there have been challenges in the past and with bilateral markets already. But my sense is that we will encounter some challenges. Maybe there will be intertype bidding, and maybe some bidders don't behave the way they should and create reliability problems. Then we will have to address that. My guess is the challenge that we'll see probably not because importers or exporters not showing up in real time, but that we see parallel flows at a volume and volatility that exceeds what we're used to managing reliably. But I'm not sure, John, if I answered your question. Maybe somebody else in the panel can help.
Hoping you would address the elephant in the room, but I guess I'll just say it. I think one of the ways we would know if we keep self-scheduling on the interties only that we have problems is if the EDAM entities go out to try and transact to the external market and they find that those entities would rather transact with another party like Markets Plus. I think that's really the fear. Is that once we have two markets, that these marketers will have options and they'll choose the one that enables their economics. As Matt talked about, you want to have all your tools, and economic bidding is a very big tool for commercial opportunities.
But Gary, if I may ask, why is this an elephant in the room? That's the efficient outcome that people will sell into the markets that offer the most value.
Oh, well, political elephant in the room, not economic elephant in the room. You're right. I mean, that is the most efficient outcome, but that's probably not the most efficient outcome for the broader market, right? The most efficient outcome for the broader market is that everyone gets to represent their true costs and power flows. We turn on the right generators and power flows efficiently. But if you're forced to self-schedule into one market, because you can't reflect those costs, but that market actually had more use for those megawatts, you're now, dispatching your market inefficient, you're dispatching your resource inefficiently. Go for it.
We're at 4:14.
I'm gonna end on that.
Guess what? You get one more question. It's a raise their hands question.
Scott's got a
Awesome.
question
That's
as
a
well.
question. Okay.
Better be a good one.
Sure, can't even get the mic to work. I don't know if my question would be better than yours. I'm gonna give a softball to you, Daniel, and you can decline to answer this because you can say, "Whoop, out of time, too much." You gave a great example to say, look, Pacificor really concerned in times of scarcity that resources will not show up. What type of carrot, or probably better to be said stick, would you want to see within your tariff or within the EDAM design to make you feel more comfortable that those resources would show up if you were to allow intertype bidding?
$5,000 a megawatt hour, and I get $1 of that in my pocket. I mean, that's a great question, right? I mean, that's one of the issues that we have to figure out. We don't exactly know. I mean, based off of what I know about the current bidding, and again, I'm not a market person, so I'm just an engineer who operates stuff. I think very similar penalties to what we have in our contracts in the bilateral or in the day-ahead markets, or day-ahead markets, would be something that we could would be useful, and it's a way that we could actually hold people accountable. And so liquidated damages plus fees and whatever else, I think it would be a very good way to do it. I don't know, because I'm not an expert on it. I don't know if that's something that is feasible in our tariff, but if it is, I think that's a great way to do it, and hold people accountable. Make sure that, no offense to anybody in the room, I'm sure I'm going to make some people upset because I know there's probably people here who are or have been marketers. Marketers are going to try to make the most money for their company that they can at any time. That is their job. But we need to make sure that they are held accountable to not causing other utilities or just utilities in general to have reliability issues for their customers. If I have a NERC reliability issue that comes out of a marketer deciding to make a little bit extra money doing something, I'm going to be very upset.
Can I respond just really quick? So, one of the great things about price formation and price scarcity is what Hannes mentioned is that if you are in it close to an EEA condition, the idea is that the price would be $2,000 a megawatt hour, and that would be their penalty. So
Sure.
not quite 5,000, but we're getting up there.
Yeah.
And then we also have a Department of Market Monitoring and FERC, which if you actually were truly engaging in speculative supply, and I say this as someone who was in the Department of Market Monitoring, I absolutely would have taken you to FERC, and the penalty is $1 million per instance. And each instance is essentially each market optimization. So the penalties for speculative supply are actually much higher than liquidated damages in any of your contracts.
Sure. And that's agreed and fair. But at the same time, the public doesn't care about what FERC does after the fact. The public cares about the fact that we put ourselves in an unreliable state and had to drop 1,000 megawatts of customers in the middle of summer during the hottest day of the year. And so what is the cost of what we look like to our customers and the visibility to our public as to what decisions we have made that impact the reliability of our system and the reliability of our customers when it's 110 degrees in the summer?
Yeah, I hear the fear, and I just think we need to keep talking. And
Yeah,
that's why we
and
want
like
the-
I said,
Yeah.
I think it's solvable, and I do think eventually Pacificor will probably have to allow it. I just think that we need more people in EDM, and we need some really good solutions for some of the concerns we have, because it makes me nervous.
Hannes, I don't want to cut you off, but we've reached time. And that was a great way to set up a future panel. And I want to hand it back over to Lindsay. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks to our panelists. Thank you.
Okay, so next we're going to go ahead and set up for the EDM resource adequacy update. Pleasure.
Oh, sorry. No, you're all right.
The next panel, which is an update from the EDM resource adequacy program. And I have here John Mayhew from the Public Service Company of New Mexico. So
Thank you very much, Lindsay. Next slide, please. I have a few quick slides. Really, I'm just here to talk about kind of the WEIM EDM resource adequacy update. This is a program that kind of got started tail end of 2025. So I was allotted 10 minutes and 5 of that is gone. So we're going to go through this pretty quick. Next slide, please. So kind of the agenda. What I want to talk about is sort of where we've been, where we are now, and where we're hoping to go. And there's been a lot of changes through this process. So I kind of want to walk through some of that as well. Next slide, please. So how we got started was, if you look in the RA sponsor group, a lot of those entities, including PNM, were part of the RAP program. We kind of, RAP started 5 or 6 years ago, had a very distinct way that they were moving forward. And when it got started, EDM and Markets Plus, 2 different markets in the West, didn't exist. And so that caused us a little bit of a pivot. And some of the entities here, we kind of got together and decided to take a look at what if we were to start our own RA program and make it specific to the day ahead market that we had chosen, EDAM? So we engaged in Brattle. Brattle came back and said, hey, there's some value to be captured. And that's really how we got started. And it was kind of this handful of the RA sponsors. And then as this has grown since the tail end of 2025, some of the RA working group that you see has participated with us. Full transparency, CAISO has been involved in some of the conversations. They've been kind of a technical advisor and sort of helping us along as we've been bringing this together. So next slide, please. So this is, I'm not going to read this entire slide to you, but really what we're trying to create is something that all of the entities within this EDAM or EDAM leaning RA program, it's going to be an RA program that's going to work for everybody. We want it to be a voluntary program. We also don't want to infringe on other RA programs. RAP is a prime example of that. We wanted to build something that was going to work for us. And we wanted a lot of engagement and involvement. But at the time we got started, our Oregon entities had kind of this obligation from their state that they needed something in place by the fall of 2026. And so all of us involved were really trying to help them get to that spot because there were complications and issues that they were going to have to deal with if this wasn't ready. So the 7 or 8 entities, we kind of got into rooms, we met quite often, and we were hammering this out, trying to help them out. And I would say probably 6 weeks, maybe 2 months ago, we started getting word from the region that it appeared we were sort of working in this kind of closed quarters. We didn't want anybody to see our work. We weren't communicating. And it really was, I think, an important moment for all of us that we had to kind of stop, take a look and go, you know what? I think they're right. Because if we were on the outside looking in, we would feel the exact same way. And it was important to validate some of those reasons. So we have completely transformed in the last couple of months on where we're going and what we're trying to do. Next slide, please. So now what we're trying to do is to make this a little bit broader. It's not going to be the 6 or 7 entities that I showed on the first couple of slides, kind of hunkering down and seeing if we can hammer this out. We want to engage everybody that's going to be involved. And so we've sort of changed our approach. We've slowed things down. And the most important piece, I mentioned that the Oregon entities kind of had this compliance hanging over their heads. They have gotten relief from their commission that has kind of said, hey, we understand where you're going. We feel like this work is important. So yes, continue along this path. We're going to work with you. And that really kind of changed everything for us. So in the last 2 months, we have had all of these workshops. We've, we sent a letter to Bosser kind of, hey, we weren't trying to hide behind closed doors. This is really what we've been working on. Here's what we have so far. We presented at the last RIF in March. We published our initial document in April, and then we started these workshops. And you can see here we've had 5 of them so far. We have 1 scheduled next week. We have 3 of them scheduled in July. We have 3 scheduled in August, and we're going to continue them through the summer and through the fall. And as we've been working on these workshops and presenting them, we've been creating design documents along the way. We've been inviting stakeholder comments. And so really, we've really tried hard to kind of broaden what we're trying to do, open it up, and get as many people in the WEC involved as possible. Next slide. So now I'm sure you're all sitting there going, John, how can I participate? Well, let me tell you. The ROW website has been kind enough to let us have kind of a page. And so everything that we have done up to this point is posted there. So all of our published documents, all of the slides from our workshops, all the recordings from our workshops, design documents are all sitting there. You can go to their site. You can look at them. We have stakeholder comments that are all due tomorrow. So I'm sure you're all gonna be very busy tonight, kind of throwing in your comments. Like I mentioned, we do have another workshop next week. And there is a question, and if you would like to participate and get involved, there is an email address there at the bottom of my slide, should you wish to get involved. Next slide. So the one thing I want to highlight on this slide as we talk about the future schedule is that word on the top that says tentative. I wrote this slide, turned it over to Lindsay, and then we changed everything from the summer and the fall. So I rewrote the slide and sent it to her, and it has changed again since I gave her this one. So let me kind of walk through what our game plan is. So I mentioned we have more stakeholder workshops. We have 3 in July, 3 in August, at least 2 in September. We initially were going to have a second round of stakeholder comments in October. However, we sort of realized that we didn't want to do 3 months worth of workshops and then have everybody try to remember what they saw in all of those and then comment in October. So we're going to have comment periods at the end of each month. So at the end of 3 workshops in July, you'll have a comment period. Same with September, same with August, same with September. The rest of the calendar year and pushing into 2027 is kind of the same. We're really looking as a group to sort of publish an initial draft sometime in the middle of November. Give you some nice reading right before you go on the Thanksgiving holiday. We want to have one final workshop with that final proposal, and then we want to open up a final comment period between the middle of November and the end of the year. We understand the holidays are there, but we feel like that's a big enough window that folks can, take a look at everything that we've presented, what we're looking to create. And then, our goal is to kind of take all of that feedback that comes back at the end of the year and then take the first quarter of 2027 to kind of deliver a final proposal. And our goal is to hand it over to the new road board. They're looking to be seated sometime in October. I think this kind of decelerated timeline really kind of helps them out. We were kind of going to align creating the document right when they were created, and we didn't want to give those 5 people, hey, congratulations on the new gig. You got a lot to build here. By the way, here's the RA program we want you to take over. So again, a lot has changed. It's very fluid. I think all of us involved kind of are really kind of rolling with it. But I think the slowing down is kind of helping. It's going to get a little bit more involvement, more engagement with everybody. It's really going to let us kind of hear more perspectives and really be able to put together the best possible proposal and not dump it on the poor road board right when they get started. Give them some time to kind of get their feet settled, and then we can have kind of a good hearty discussion about this is the work we put in, this is what we're hoping to achieve. What do you think? So I am over. I did have a slide for questions. I don't know how much time we have, but I'm happy to answer any questions you might have. I know I went through that pretty quick.
Yeah, if they're quick. Chair Wagner.
Really super quick, John, thanks for that update. Is the bosser and your regulators on board with this timeline? Are they feeling good about this?
We are, I believe we have some meetings coming up. I'd have to look at the schedule, but it is something, we are definitely going to reach out and make sure that as we've adjusted this timeline on the fly, we want to hear their feedback and see how they feel.
Are there any other quick questions? All right. Well, we're going to go ahead and wrap up. Thank you, John.
Yes, my pleasure.
Okay, so next, I'm actually going to turn it over to the Western Energy Markets governing body liaison to the RIF, Member Decker, for some closing remarks.
Thank you. So, is this on? So as always, the RIF just has done such an excellent job in this meeting. Getting the information on the EDM and having the panel set up to talk about the things they're doing. Some of the comments really resonated, the things like data to give you insight versus just data, and recognizing that data as information doesn't tell you anything. until you then apply that insight together. So I thought the panel did a great job. You guys really said that well. The intertie bidding, obviously there's more to come on that. There's much more to come on that. There's people's view of it are all over the board, and even today that was very well demonstrated in this panel. And on the RA work, well, it's not a RIF initiative. To have the RIF have its kind of shoulder to the grindstone on that, or a number of the members of the RIF to be looking at the RA program. You know, roll back 4 years ago, the RIF couldn't have done any of these as well as you're doing them today. And I think that really, not only the leadership of the RIF, but also to the liaison's commitment to the RIF. So you need to applaud yourselves for all that work. And as we think about going to the row and that transition of the RIF to the SRC, you know, what does that look like? And I'm hoping you will all stay deeply engaged because you've done such a good job for the Western energy market. You will only do a greater job and a greater service to the row. So I hope you all are thinking about what does that look like and what is your time commitment, because it's going to be a big lift. This is my last meeting as the RIF liaison, which much to my disappointment, because you guys are such a labor of love. But I would tell you that my colleague Rob will be the next liaison. So you'll be having your discussions with him. And again, he's going to do a great job for you, and you guys do a great job for us. So thank you.
Thank you. We will definitely miss our chats. Okay. So to wrap things up, I just wanted to thank everybody for the participation with all of this. We had great level of participation. And I also wanted to thank all of the liaisons for all of the effort in putting this on. It was a big lift, so thank you. You did a great job. And then I wanted to go ahead and do a calendar reminder. So could we move to the next slide, please? Oh, actually, maybe go back one. Oh, it was right there. It was right in front of me. Sorry. So we have a future meeting coming up. Our next in-person meeting will actually be the day before the symposium on October 5th. I don't have the room yet, but it'll be in the same location. So I hope everybody will join us for that future meeting. And then that's all I have. So we can go ahead and adjourn. And for those who are participating in the room, we have a reception and we hope you'll join us. It's in the Puma room, which is just outside the door, and take a left and it is just right across the hall. So I hope to see you there. Thank you.